And greetings, everybody. I remembered to turn on my microphone this time. It's just me right now, and joined by my colleague, him, back up. In case the main computer dies, I have a recovery system, so I have two computers running. For some reason, StreamYard and Restream break when I'm doing streams. Otherwise, the computer's fine. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. It is always a joy to be with you all during the evening. It's something I look forward to, as I work a busy day these days, and then it's like, well, it'd be really nice to hang out with people and just relax, kick back in the evening. And so it was a busy day trying to push through 2 peer-reviewed papers and trying to do science, which which a lot of this channel was organized for, was to do science. But ever since two publications were accepted this year, it's just sparked even more of a flood of other things. So it's just like feast or famine. So, and greetings, Dr. Dan. Dr. Dan is here. Got to talk a lot about genetic entropy. So Actually, I've invited Dr. Dan to this channel because I had a pre-planned program. It was just going to be me and Emery Moyna, but Dr. Dan, I wanted to extend the invitation if you want to ever have a conversation about things. You know that when you email me, I try to respond, and we can set something up to discuss things. Now, I have been focusing on a lot of topics, and I had talked about the history of intelligent design and creationism. And we can have that talk. So one reason that I have the variety shows is that it's a little bit of a break from the technical shows, because we're going to have some of those too. And I think that when Emery and I did a 5.5 part series with 2 hours per episode on R.H. Brady's paper on natural selection, we were just like, I think we pounded our poor subscribers into the ground with just all the technical stuff. And then also the variety shows are a little easier to host, because you just pick random topics and you try to relate them to the main theme of the channel, which is evidence and reasons for the Christian faith. This channel tries to declare the works of God, and not so much to try to get into arguments and debates. I'm not, there are other channels for that. There are other channels for high drama. This channel, I wish to encourage believers in the Lord by helping them consider what God has made. And so we'll talk. What's on the docket is testable predictions of Scripture, and why it's harder for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. Godzilla Freak pointed out that the title lists GE twice, so I said, okay, maybe I'll improvise and try to think about something for General Electric toward the end. Okay, so I haven't quite figured that out. I'll talk about airplanes and instrument flying in 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 8. That verse says, we love him though we have not seen him. So for most Christians, for most of all of Christendom, only very few people have directly seen their Lord and Savior. And that does relate a little bit. The closest thing I can relate to that is instrument flying. I also will cover, let me see if I can grab the book. I had it. Oh, goodness. I had it handy, and I don't know where I've since misplaced it. I might have to run upstairs and grab it. The book is entitled, and if Emery Moyna said he might be able to drop in to the discussion. So if he drops in, then I can go run and try to get the book. It's the book, An Atheist Defends Intelligent Design by Bradley Monton. Bradley Monton is an atheist, and he's defending intelligent design as something that needs to be explored. And I've also mentioned Atheist ID. I mentioned that over this week, and that may seem strange, but there is a camp of people who profess themselves to be atheists that believe that like the fine-tuning of the universe and also life indicates an intelligent designer of some sort. They don't wish to identify that designer with the Christian God. And so there are varieties of atheist ID, such as what one was called omega point theory, or intelligent universe theory, where it's kind of pantheistic, but the universe is kind of like a mind. And there's another one, panspermia, space alien origins of life. So there has been, interestingly, atheist ID, which is I've encouraged Christians to study that because I think it also strengthens the case for intelligent design, even though it's atheistic. And I also covered pagan ID in this book, A Severe Mercy. So I'll talk a little bit about that if I can get a hold of the book, if Emery comes here. Otherwise, I'm going to have to try to scurry upstairs and get it. So I'm going to hold out hope Emery Moyna will join us. So then I wanted to relate then what do we do if we have atheist ID and pagan ID and Christian ID enters in creationism, because creationism will tie the hypothesis of an intelligent designer to the Christian God. I will, it's actually been kind of, and I'll talk a little bit about genetic entropy, not from creationism, but from Michael Lynch and Bryan Sykes. Obviously, they have a different take on it than would Dr. John Sanford. And I think it'd be helpful to hear that the idea of, at least specifically, the human genome deteriorating is not unique to creationists. It is something that health professionals and geneticists are concerned about as far as the human race. And that does have implications of how we view ourselves and our future here in the universe. And I'm just going to read some Wikipedia articles. So this will be a process of me learning, because when you deal with atheism, you also deal with things like nihilism. And we might talk about that. And I'll also talk about Nietzsche. I'm not going to get really deep into the philosophy, but I feel, as I said, that on the Evidence Reasons channel, we do a little bit of presuppositional apologetics. And so this will be a little bit reasons why we should consider the Christian faith, because I'll argue that the alternative, if we're saying Christianity versus atheism, is also Christianity versus nihilism, and their consequences if a society becomes very nihilistic. I'll also talk about the evolutionary problem posed by the backward layout of the fish vagina. It's actually that the proper term is urogenital opening, and versus the forward layout in humans. And there's some things with cloacal stage of development. Now, that's not a very strong argument in favor of creationism or against evolutionism, but I just thought it was a little bit humorous also. And I may talk a little bit about some of the peer-reviewed work that we're really trying to push forward. And it's one of the few times this wasn't on the docket, but it was on my mind today because I was conferencing all day on it. The work in structural biology and tying it to bioinformatics, and why I think the nested hierarchies that are used as proof of evolution actually show instead that a common design that is highly optimized for scientific discovery. So I may talk about that in passing because that's been on my mind. And then finally, if I can get to it, Benner's problem of the single biopolymer paradox. I mentioned that in passing yesterday as a critique of Dave Farina and Origin of Life researcher Lee Cronin. And then also I'll just, the problem of Brandolini's law. So I'd like to thank everyone who's joined us. Let me extend greetings. So we have Godzilla Freak here, and hello, and One Cow Stampede. Talk a lot about genetic entropy. Yes, greetings, Dr. Dan. Thank you for joining us. And I'm sorry that I know you've been really, really busy, as I expect someone in your position would be, being a parent and also a professor. And so I'm always thrilled when you drop in. And I was really hoping you could have joined my talk on the history of intelligent design and creationism. If you'd like to join me for one of those talks again, we can. And Jeremy Martin, it's a long time no see. Great to see you. And Matt's, oh my goodness, Matt's, what an inspiration. I got to tell you something about Matt's. He's been reading some of the things I've written since my days at Access Research Network. This would go all the way back to 2003, and he supported me in many ways. And I just want to publicly acknowledge you for your support of me. That's almost 18 years. 18 years, and he's seen my debates with the atheist. Now, I hope this is okay with you, Matt. I wanted to share with you something. You were saying it was great to hear me talk about the Bible. Well, see, when you first met me, I was just returning back to the Christian faith after having nearly left. I never completely left, but I nearly left. And it was in the study of abiogenesis that brought me back, and intelligent design. But I really wasn't studying the Bible very much during those years that I was debating creation science and intelligent design, and then studying physics. So it's really been the last 5 or 6 years I've been thinking about biblical things. And so I'm very moved, I'm very moved that you were blessed to hear some of my teaching of the Bible, because I felt these were things I needed to address, that part of what was making it difficult for me to be a Christian. I said, I'll try to tackle one tough question at a time. Like the first problem was design, and then things in creationism, and then the problem of the hidden God, the problem of evil, and what about childhood cancer and things like that. So Dr. James Carter just said, hi all, I just got back from a week-long vacation last night. A lot of catching up to do. 124 missed YouTube notifications. Which reminds me, this Dr. Carter, if you're listening, this coming Wednesday, Dr. Rob Stadler and I finally, it looks like we're going to be able to actually give that debate that never was presentation on abiogenesis. Actually, the original talk was going to be, is DNA evidence for God? And just to reacquaint some of you with how that transpired, it was, we were contacted by Digital Gnosis, and Converse Contender was trying to be like the mediator. And Converse Contender contacted me and said someone would like to debate you and John Maddox and Salvador Cordova over the question, is DNA evidence of God? And so the other team ended up being Digital Gnosis and James Fodor. So that was kind of the tentative agreement. And then I said, hey, John, in case one of us is not able to show, could we recruit Rob Stadler to be a backup? And John said, actually, I'll step aside. He said, I'd pay money to see you and Rob Stadler debate that in the affirmative. And so we ended up being the first team was Rob Stadler and yours truly. And so we contacted Converse Contender and said, this is the first team, and we'll just work out a time and the format. Well, after it was announced that Rob Stadler, who got his PhD at MIT and Harvard in biomedical engineering and has like 140 patents, and millions of people have his medical device implanted in them. So a lot of, millions of people are alive today because of his inventions. When it was announced that, and then he also wrote the book, The Stairway to Life, which I'm so pleased to present again. He co-authored it with Dr. Change Tan. When it was announced that he was going to be on the first team, the negotiations for that debate on modern day debate broke down. And so I said, hey, Rob, since I ensnared you in all this, why don't we just make the presentation we would have made anyway on modern day debate? So that's going to be, God willing, this coming Wednesday. And Jeremy Martin says he has to go turn in. And Nephilim Free, welcome. Thank you for dropping in. And I wanted to say, Dr. Carter, if you're free, the It's going to be 9:30 Eastern time, so that would be 6:30 your time. If you'd like to drop in and join the panel, I'm going to also try to get a hold of Dr. Change 10, and we might even invite Ryan Hayes. So Rob and I will probably give anywhere from a 20 to 40-minute presentation on origin of life, and we could just have a free-for-all discussion of a number of things. So there was something, I think that was most of what I wanted to talk about. And so we'll just go right through the docket here. Okay, testable predictions. How I even thought about that, because people are saying creationism doesn't have testable predictions. And really, I'm not going to be extremely serious about this. It was really kind of funny because someone of Reasons to Believe, which is an Old Earth outfit, he said, well, actually, God makes a testable prediction. If you die tonight, or if you say commit suicide, you'll actually know if there's an intelligent designer. He said, don't do that, obviously, but that is a testable prediction. And I'm going to say, I guess we're all sort of forced in making that that test, and that everyone here is, unless the Lord returns, will pass away. And the testable prediction is we will face the claim is of Christian creationism is that we will all face God before the judgment seat. And granted, you'd like to have evidence right now in this life to help you make those decisions. But like so many decisions in life, you are faced to make decisions with incomplete information. So that is one testable prediction. There are testable predictions that I think creationism makes in regard to geology, and also what we would expect in discoveries and things like genetic deterioration. Independent of what the creationists have said, Dr. Bryan Sykes at Oxford gives the human race about 100,000 years. So there are testable predictions that may not directly arise out of Christianity or biblical creationism, etc., but there are testable predictions that were used to make creationist arguments, and one of them is the genetic deterioration of the human race. So we can actually now, with the powerful sequencing that we have, we can detect whether there is a continuing rise in heritable birth defects, and that's of interest to everyone. So, and then also with some things in geology and cosmology. When I was in graduate school at Johns Hopkins, I nearly fell out of my seat when the professors were describing inflation models. And I knew that when I was really considering young cosmos creationism, that the universe is young, I said, okay, so an empirical observation we should see is evidence against inflation theory of the Big Bang. And here it is, 2021 Nobel Prize winner Roger Penrose is coming out and saying that, and a lot of others are saying that inflation is on really shaky foundations. I said, it doesn't surprise me. Another thing that I was seeing was that the whole dark matter thing would start to become a debacle. So everything that the creationists, especially the young earth creationists, were wanting to see, it's starting to unfold. And so I know the skeptics may not think that's a big deal, but for our community, that was a big deal, that we're seeing this, we're seeing these developments happen. And so when people ask, Sal, why are you young earth creationists? You know that there are problems still in your model. And I said, my response is, yes, I've seen these problems ever since I was pondering it, but there have been developments in terms of observation and experiment that are putting young earth creationism in the right direction. in terms of the trends you would expect. If the theory is right, you would expect these observations to arise and the experiments to show this or that. And that's exactly what's happened in the 20 or so years that I've been in the creation evolution controversy. And that being said, even up until 2012, I would say I was only 75% a young earth creationist and 25% old. It's like I was kind of caught between two minds. And I just decided that I said, okay, there are many claims in the Bible that are more outrageous than young earth creationism. One of them is eternal life. If you believe Jesus will return and that the old heavens and old earth will pass away and there will be new earth and new heavens and eternal life, that's a more outrageous claim than thinking the earth is young. And I said, well, you know what? Maybe that's not such a big step of faith after all. And what do I have to lose by adopting it? I think this would be really cool to see it transpire. And normally, even though I'm a professional gambler, the ones who are successful in professional gambling they hate taking risks. They have the exact opposite temperament of people that are compulsive gamblers. They actually look at this as a calculated risk. And my calculated risk was, you know what, this is a good bet to make because we have nothing to lose by supposing this is true and just waiting to see if the evidence comes through. So with that, I'd like to introduce my co-host, Emery, my favorite graduate student of biology, and I've been rooting for you. And one reason I haven't had you on as my co-host is so much as I've been reluctant to ask you on the weekdays because I want you to be studying and doing homework. And I'm proud of you that you're at the top of your class. God bless you.
Well, thank you, Sal. I don't know about top of my class, but I'm doing well enough. Sorry, I'm running a little bit late, everybody. My email is blowing up. One of my, I apologize for that. It's hot here. I have to have the windows open. One of my videos is blowing up, and I'm getting therefore my inbox is blowing up. So, but anyway, so thank you, Sal, for having me. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. So, Emery, I think I may have misplaced one of my books upstairs.
Okay.
Did you want to talk for a little bit?
Sure.
Okay, because one reason it's great having you as a co-host is, not quite like John Maddox, but you love to talk and just say what's on your mind. Hopefully, I'll be back down in 2 minutes or so.
Sure, no problem, Sal, no problem. So I guess I'll wander through. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. Thank you for all the wonderful people I recognize in the chat. And again, sorry I'm a little bit late. I know that Sal has a list of things he wants to talk about, but I don't want to spoil those. Geez, I'm real good at this, aren't I? So I guess I'll kind of explain why I'm late. My inbox is currently exploding. And I guess maybe exploding is not the right term, but I have some people very angry with me for some of the videos I have put out. And some of you probably have watched them because they're recent. I won't go into all the details, but in the one particular video, I predicted exactly what the response I would get would be. And sure enough, I got it. So it's not pleasant necessarily, but it is the it is the life of being a creationist on YouTube. You have to have very thick skin because nobody likes you. Sometimes the good people on your own side don't like you. So it just comes with the territory. So anyway, that's why I'm running a little bit behind. Oh no, actually, Godzilla, your email was actually interesting. Your email was much more fun than the things that are currently blowing up my inbox. Because your emails didn't call me names or say that I wasn't a Christian. So I appreciate that. By the way, guys, if you want to email somebody and challenge them on a position, it's probably not a good idea to question their salvation as part of your email. Just a thought.
So Emery, I missed out on what you said. This sounds juicy. Is there
No,
drama on your channel?
I didn't even mean to start drama this time. I was trying to be good.
Oh wow!
So one of my videos has blown up.
Meaning it.
Meaning that certain people are very, very angry about it.
Oh, okay.
Like we're talking like I'm a slanderer, I'm a false brother, accuser of the brother, and I think that the people who are opposed to me are agents of Satan. I'm not a Christian. And this is coming, I won't say who it's coming from because I would have to make a bunch of emails public, and I don't want to do that. But I mean, this is coming from someone who, if I said their name, would be well known beyond just the creation YouTube community.
Was he on your side, or?
I'm not going to go any further.
Oh, okay.
I don't want to give out any identifying information.
I'm sorry.
I don't want to get another email saying I'm not a Christian and I'm slandering him.
Yeah.
But
well, I didn't watch it. Okay, so
okay,
I didn't watch it, and now I think we all need to know. So I think maybe I'll put you in the description section so they can all see what all this is about. So
yes, if you want to do that, that's fine.
Okay, I was only being half serious, but I try to keep this a low drama channel. I really do. Oh my goodness! And
I hate drama. I don't want the drama. It just kind of comes to me. I don't even want it.
Maybe we'll just move on to another subject. I was going to say, okay, I was talking about testable predictions of Scripture, and I said why it's harder for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. And that was the apostles were pretty alarmed at that statement, because when you read a lot of the Old Testament, the idea is if you serve the Lord well, you'll prosper. And so it's expected that rich men were good people. And this goes to testable predictions. If you're like that thief on a cross and you've totally messed up your life and you don't have really much to live for, you're one is willing to, if you're kind of in that situation, and by the way, that's one of my favorite passages in the Bible. If you're in that position, you're willing to take risks in the sense that you have nothing to lose. You're willing to say, I'll give my life to you, Lord. I'll give my life to you. Whereas if you have a lot to live for and, there may be reputations, if not money, there may be relationships you have, rich in the sense that you're loved and appreciated and life is good and you have a great reputation. And if you accept the Christian faith, you might lose some of that. It is hard. It is harder. Whereas when you don't have anything, it's a lot easier because you don't have really much to give up. And one of my favorite pastors, Lon Solomon, who first went from atheist to theist, even though not a Christian, was in his study of enzymes. He was in a special class because he's gifted and talented. In high school, he had a summer camp at Virginia Tech, and he was studying enzymes, 16, 17-year-old studying enzymes. And he was so fascinated, and he just went back to his dorm room, and just at the top of the stairs, he said, there is a God, there is a God. And then he went off to college, was a drug dealer, and afterward, he was thinking, after he graduated, he said, I don't have anything to live for. And he was thinking about suicide. And I've shared his story before. There's a video on Fox News. Just Google Lon Solomon testimony, Fox News. Britt Hume was interviewing him. Britt said, so you were thinking about killing yourself? He said, yeah, I didn't have anything to live for. And he said, he ran into a street preacher, and he said there was something in the street preacher's eyes. He just had that feeling that street preacher had what he was looking for. It turned out Lon Solomon was the only guy that the street preacher ever, quote unquote, converted. Really, it's the Lord that converts. But Lon said, yeah, God, you can have my life. It's not really worth much to me. And so, when I look at 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 26 through 31, that God chooses the despised of the world, the people that are not noble or power or influence or wisdom as far as the wisdom of the world is concerned. It's the very people that are outcasts of society. Included would be those people that don't have a lot to live for. God chose those to shame those who are in power and those who are wise. And so I think the step of faith is easier for those, when God's brought them to the point that they don't have much. And it's at that point, it's much easier to make the decision. And so as far as these testable predictions of the Bible, we never have as many facts as we want to make decisions if, like, Jesus is real, whether he was resurrected, and to other things, even like the creationist case. But it's a lot easier to make that wager of your soul that I'm going to maybe accept it by faith when you don't have a lot going for you. And I was also thinking, what are some of the causes of atheism? Or even not so much atheism, but people may be wandering in their faith. And it says in the Proverbs, give me neither riches nor poverty. And, if you're too poor, you end up cursing the Lord. If you're too rich, you end up being self-sufficient and you forget the Lord. And I was thinking, yeah, that happened to a lot of kings of Israel. They lived righteously, good things happened, and they began to wander a little bit. And I think sometimes the prosperity of a nation and cultures, this is, and also corporately in the people of God, the children of Israel, when they had prosperous times, they began to forget the Lord. So some of the things that we put forward as evidences for the Christian faith, they're harder to accept when you have everything going for you and you just want to run your life the way you want. But it changes when you're in desperate straits. And not that I had much of a point except just to make that observation. And I know for myself, it was when I was feeling in desperate straits, I began to actually, it's like my heart is breaking. So why am I studying abiogenesis? It's because I was searching for God. If you have any thoughts, that's pretty much all I had on that segment of our variety show.
Honestly, not really. I think that you've covered that issue relatively well. I think we move on.
Okay, so we'll go to our next segment. And by the way, I found the book. See that? Seeking God in Science, An Atheist Defends Intelligent Design. An Atheist Defends Intelligent Design by Bradley Monton. So we'll cover that after this. That'll be the segment after this present one. So this one is going to be 1 Peter 1:8. It says in 1 Peter 1:8, though you love him, though you do not see him. You love him, though you do not see him. Actually, could you read that verse, Emery?
Sure. Let me pull up my Bible. What passage did you need?
1 Peter 1:8.
1 Peter 1:8. Whom having not seen ye love, in whom though now ye see him not, yet believing, ye rejoice with joy unspeakable and full of glory.
And so that is the case for most Christians, and that is a challenge, that we put our faith and trust in the person of Christ whom we've not seen, and we love him. And I thought, I'll talk a little bit more as far as this relates to atheism, but as I said, one, there, I wanted to say, people say, well, that's stupid. And then, sometimes we're so eager to try to persuade the atheists about Christianity. It's like, okay, it might be maybe better, like say in a discussion or a quote unquote debate, to have lowered expectations of what you're going to settle. And maybe we could, what I've been thinking of is like, you can confront the atheist and say, well, do you have anything better? Because there's no answers in atheism. And I realized, going back to like the thief on the cross, what answers in atheism would you give him? Or anyone who's in desperate straits and really is has nothing to lose. I almost wanted to show, and I may show it at maybe the very end of this video, is Major Strucker. There, he was famous in the movie Black Hawk Down, but he's a real guy. He was in the Battle of Mogadishu, and he was relating how he was going to have to go back into the town after one of his the men under his command was shot to death, and there was just blood all over his Humvee, and he's cleaning it up and saying, you know, my wife is pregnant, and if I die, you know, my son will be raised. He won't know his daddy. And he said, I was so scared because I knew I was going to die. At that moment, he started to pray, and he was comforted that if he died, he'd be home with his family and the Lord. And if he lived, he's going to go back to Georgia and see his wife and his baby. And he suddenly, all that fear, he had peace. And I was just contrasting that with, what do you have if you're an atheist? You're going to have to make, you know, Richard Dawkins, someone asked, how do you find meaning? And they said, oh, you have to make up your own meaning. I'm just like, yeah, that's just me. That's just, now who's doing make-believe at this point? So that's kind of how I was thinking about it. You know, we're sometimes Christians are feeling like their views are being criticized because they may feel defenseless. But I just wanted to say, do you think that the other people have better answers than you have? You have at least the witness of, and we'll talk about it, witness of science, the observable facts that there is a God, and we have the historical record of evidence that Jesus was a real person, not to mention all the other characters, places, and events in the Bible. And granted, it's not as strong as you'd like, but it's better than nothing. If you have something, that's better than nothing. In fact, mathematically speaking, it's infinitely better. And if there are no answers in atheism, you've got something more than the atheists have. And I totally respect it may not be as much as you'd want. And I think it's a glorious thing you'd want to have the presence of God in your life so that he's as evident as the air you breathe. And I totally get that. But, you know, sometimes God doesn't give you quite as much as you want. And he's testing to see your determination to pursue the kingdom of God. So that's how I feel about 1 Peter 8, and I'll relate that to instrument flying. But Emery, if you had any thoughts?
I mean, I think that there's a place where, as you point out, there are no answers in atheism at all. And I think that when you start thinking about that and try and figure out your own meaning or your own purpose, what good is that to someone in a position like the major you were talking about? Like, at what point I know that this is not entirely true, but the principle of there's no atheists in foxholes, like, there's a reason that saying exists. Now, obviously, that's a general statement, right? There's always going to be exceptions to that. But, you know, guys in that kind of situation, life-threatening situations, making up their own meaning and purpose suddenly just doesn't feel very relevant anymore.
Right. Amen. And, you know, we saw that with Peter Boghossian, who's a militant atheist, and his mother was dying. So all of his militancy, where he's trying to deconvert people, he couldn't bring himself to try to deconvert his mother at the time of her death. And I, you know, especially me having gone through this, I'm not trying to be insensitive to where he was, but I just like, good on him. He didn't rip the crucifix from his mother's hand and mock her for her Christian beliefs, because I think he realized, oh my good, you know what that story told me? I think it dawned on him he had nothing to give her.
I think he knows that now. Boghossian is a lot less militant than he used to be.
Wow.
And he's moved a lot further away from the militant branch of atheism.
Good for him.
So I think he might be. I don't know that he's anywhere close to becoming a Christian, but I think he's realizing that maybe he's not quite as doesn't need to be quite as angry and militant about his atheism as he was previously.
That's good to hear. I mean, he was okay. Just so people know who we're talking about, so our viewers, Boghossian wrote a manual for creating atheists, and he started this whole thing called street epistemology, which I think is kind of mocking street preachers, street epistemologists. And he was just saying, you guys got to grow up, etc. But then, there's that incident where it's like, he couldn't mock his mother. And he, I think he realized it was empty what he had to offer her. And the thing that kind of crystallized this was Randolph Richardson, who had a debate with John Maddox. He's an atheist, and he said, yeah, there are no answers in atheism. I'm like, okay, if an atheist is saying that, and I wasn't trying to mock atheists, if an atheist is saying that, then I feel comfortable saying that that's the case. I've not heard an atheist or even an agnostic disagree. That, and so that's the starting point that I encourage people. Oh my goodness, Dr. Dan had this to say: street epistemology is dumb. Don't harass people on the street, please. Thank you, Dr. Dan. And I was like, so that was kind of my, and I really sincerely mean this, that I'm very sympathetic to atheists on several levels. One, like, for the reason that I don't believe in Zeus or all these other gods, I'm very much, and Conrad points out, yeah, but how many other mothers did Peter Boghossian mock? Yeah, exactly.
Good point.
Good point, Conrad. And okay, so I'm an atheist with respect to Zeus. I'm an atheist with respect to Athena or Aphrodite or any of these. It's like, okay, I totally get that. And I also get the fact that there are people that are praying for their loved ones, and they feel they don't get an answer from God. They feel abandoned, and therefore they conclude there's no God. So I'm not trying to be insensitive to their viewpoints. So you don't see me getting on a tirade about those sorts of things. Where I may ever get on a tirade, and I do sometimes, is the question of abiogenesis. It's like, okay, when you're pushing this so hard that you're starting to do questionable things, and even people on the side are calling it out, I think you're going too far. There's something, there's something unwholesome there that is, that's where I draw the line. But for these people that have prayed and sought God, and they feel they've not, I've been there, so I'm more sensitive to that. I'm not that kind of, I'm not the kind of person that will just kind of rag on that sort of atheism, because I get that. So I haven't even gotten into my main point, which was instrument flying and as an illustration of faith. Emery, if you had any comments before I talk about instrument flying.
I think the comment from Conrad was fantastic.
Yeah, that was a great comment. And I'll just highlight here, Dr. Dan. If someone is just going about their day not bothering you, don't start messing with them about what to believe. Just let them be. And by the way, I feel that way too. Even when I share my faith, I don't know about that street preacher that convinced Lon Solomon. I did get the impression that he was very gentle and not getting in people's face. So even with Christianity, I don't get in people's faces.
That tends to just make people angry, not actually to get you anywhere.
Yeah, and I'll have to say this. When I was a Christian, some of these people would be saying, do you know if you're going to heaven today? And I just like, dude, are you insinuating I'm not even a Christian? I'm already offended, So, anyway, I'm going to talk about instrument flying, and this is why I like the variety shows. I get to talk about some things that are outside the creation evolution controversy, and just things that are kind of neutral, and yet they're not completely neutral. They've been a part of my life, as some of you know. Oh, by the way, you could see Mr. Backup here. That was a picture of me in my younger days. That was me on an aerobatic airplane on a Marchetti fighter, and that was fun to fly. I was an engineer in the aerospace and defense industry for a long time, and I only got retrained in biology like in the last 5 or 6 years. So it's been quite a shift of gears for me personally. And so sometimes it'll leak out that I'll talk about airplanes, and I'll talk about my fascination with the history of World War II, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's nice to talk about that. But I'll tell you something that's really kind of serious. And I said, the Federal Aviation Regulations, the FARs, and it's a book, enormous book. And when I was going through pilot training, I was like, yeah, about a third of my training was learning the Federal Aviation Regulations. A large part of the training was just understanding the regulations, understanding navigation and weather. And I'm just like, only 15% is actually learning how to fly the airplane and the control. I said, there's so much time spent on the ground just learning all these things. But there's a saying, and for both these regulations and then the NATOPS, the Naval Air Training and Operations Procedures, because I supported Naval Air Systems Command. Everyone said that these procedures were written in blood, meaning that the reason that these procedures got developed was someone died, and they figured out, oh, don't do that. So they're procedures written in blood. How does that relate to me personally? I just want to share this story. I had my flight log. I was looking through it, and I was joyriding. I think it was one April in 2000. I'm pretty sure it was 2002. I took a couple young ladies up into the airplane. I said, let's just go fly over the mountains or something at night out there in Harrisonburg. And we were just having a lot of fun. And I was near the airport, my base airport, and I was calling my position out, say, this is November 66 Romeo. I don't even remember. I said, I think I said, I've forgotten how to make the proper radio calls. I'm so embarrassed. Midfield downwind, which means you're about to make a landing, and the airfield's right beside you, and you're just kind of setting up, and you're about to make all these turns to finally land the airplane midfield downwind. And John Zachary was a fellow student at my flight school. I never met him personally, but I recognized the name, and he said, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm Salvador Cordova. I'm 66 Romeo." And I said, "I'm at Shenandoah Flight School." And I said, I have two passengers. I have two young ladies beside me. And he cracked a little joke. He said, "Oh yeah, I see you. I have a visual." And I just laughed. And that was my last communication with him. The next I heard about Jan Zachary was he died at a crash. Not the wisest. And I'm like, this is really serious. And then another guy from my flight school I found out died. And I'm like, this started to, it starts to make you kind of just tremble. I'm like, this was such a fun thing. And then people are dying. So what happened to John Zachary, and really I had mentioned this on the internet before, and friends and family may have seen it, and I want to be really respectful about this, but it's out in the papers. First off, I found out, people told me at the college that because this was near James Madison University, that he accepted Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior 3 weeks before he died. So praise God for that. And so that radio call I made to him was in August 2002. He had his accident, and I think that's correct. Uh, I, well, whatever the exact details are, what happened is he landed on a hot day on a uncertified airstrip, which means someone just kind of plowed in their own property and was using it as an airstrip. He decided to land there, and it wasn't long enough. And it says in the manual that this is how long the runway has to be if you're going to clear an object that's 50 feet. There was an 80-foot tree there, and he almost made it. If he were just higher by a few feet, he would have cleared. But it was a hot day in what we call density altitude. The air was too thin. If it were a freezing cold day, the airplane probably would have been able to get enough altitude. He'd still be alive today. Miraculously, he had 2 passengers who were also pilots, and one of them was a friend, acquaintance, Andrew Rogers-Molin. He just happened to say, he has to get to work or something like that. I don't remember, but he stepped out of the airplane, and John Zachary took off with the remaining passenger, and they died. And that kind of sobered me about what life was. And it was around that time I said, I'm going to start leading Bible studies and doing apologetics. I said, life is too short. We have to cherish every day. So how that relates to flying airplanes, you have to try to fly by the book. You break the rules, they're there for a reason because it's written in blood. And I was watching, and I'll do a show on this about naval aviation because I supported work in naval aviation. And one guy was talking about all the stuff, the UFO stuff. And so that there's probably going to be another show where I mentioned that, but it happened to be that one of the guys that was at McLean Bible Church, the apologetics ministry there, was a F-14 Tomcat pilot. And he actually knows Ward Carroll, who has been making these videos on F-14s and talked about the UFO stuff, but also some really cool stuff about F-14s, all sorts of battles, and then also accidents that happen. And when when you don't fly by the manual, what ends up happening, and there were some deaths there. And so that relates to instrument flying. When there are conditions that are so bad you don't have appropriate visibility, you have to fly under what they call instrument flight rules. And those rules are there so you don't die. And faith is like that, where you can't see, but you have to fly by your instruments. And when I went through the training of instrument flying, you think you're going to be able to do this okay because you trust your body and your feelings. But I remember when I was going through instrument training, they put these blinders on you. They call it the hood, and it forces you not to look outside. You can only see your instrument, and the instructor would put you in a very slow turn for like 2 minutes, and we'll say, okay, I'm just getting your body adjusted here, and he'll even tell you what he's doing, and he'll make you close your eyes, and then he'll say, okay, now open your eyes, fly to this heading, and only use your instruments. And I was so disoriented because I start doing this or this, and just like I know I'm trying to go straight, but the instruments are telling me I'm turning, and I'm like, no, I'm going straight because your body is adjusted. And then it's also the same if you're in a slow descent or a slow climb. Your body may think you're in straight and level flight. And I nearly, like a lot of young pilots, I nearly killed myself doing stupid stuff. I was trying to land on an airfield that was dark at night and no runway lights. And I just was thrilled about the challenge. I got myself into a stall, and I heard this this stall warning horn going off as I made the approach, and I couldn't land the airplane because I thought I was going to go right into the ground. And I pulled I pulled the nose up too fast and I heard that stall warning horn. Now I was like a lot of times you get disoriented, and it was pitch black, and I was starting to have a little bit of vision problems in my eyes. I didn't realize it at the time. Your eyes don't perform as well sometimes at night, and also I was starting to get needing to get like reading glasses or something, and I couldn't see my instrument. I heard that blasted stall warning horn, and I said, I'm straight and level. So I'm thinking that my airplane is, I was thinking my airplane was like that, and I was near the ground, and yet your training says, if you hear that stall warning horn, what that means is your airplane's actually like that. Your nose is too high. You're losing speed. You're just going to fall like that. What you have to do, it's actually counterintuitive, is if you're actually starting to lose, risk of losing altitude like that, the tendency is to pull back and try to go up. What you have to do is try to go level. Try to go level. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, I'm level. If I push the control down, I'm going to go right into the ground. I had to fight. I was hearing that blasted horn go off, and I was like, I remember all my training. You have to disregard how you feel. You got to fly by the book and have faith in your instruments. I said, either the instruments are wrong or my feelings are misleading me. And I said, I think that those instruments are right. And so I leveled the airplane, and, I pushed down and I said, okay, in 5 seconds, I'm going to crash right now if I'm wrong, if those instruments have misled me. And after about 7 seconds were gone, I was like, I'm still alive. Praise God, I'm still alive. And I began to gain altitude. And then I could finally start to see marks on the horizon, like lights. And that's why I'm here today, because I followed the instruments and tried to follow the book. And of course, you could see the spiritual lesson here is that your feelings can mislead you. And that's what flying by faith is, because there's sometimes things will, your gut will tell you one thing and you're being told to do something else. And a lot of you know about John F. Kennedy Jr. He wasn't instrument qualified, and he was flying in conditions he shouldn't have had. He had his wife in him. They were flying to a family wedding, and he had too much confidence in his own abilities. His flight instructor said, that's going to be a tough flight. Why don't I join you? I'll fly you. You could fly the airplane, but I'll be there in the cockpit with you. And I'm always grateful when personally, I'm glad when I can get a co-pilot in the cockpit to help me. Oh, that's not politically correct. We're supposed to call it flight deck because it's so sexist to call it cockpit. Sorry, I'm old school. But Kennedy was there. He got disoriented in the fog and in the night. He couldn't tell up from down, and he should have looked at his instruments. He was in a descent, and he got so disoriented. He was distrusting his instruments. That's what the National Transportation Safety Board said. He was distrusting his instruments, and he crashed the airplane. It got so bad that he actually was flying the airplane upside down by the time he hit. And and Sandy's here. Yes. We'll talk archaeology sometime, Sandy. That'd be great. And I just, that really is just, I just wanted to share personal anecdotes. Having been in the aviation industry, it's amazing whatever you experience in life, that's how you view spiritual things too. You view it through the lens of your personal experiences, and that's mine. So, when they talk about walking by faith and not by sight, that's how those verses are seen to me through, my time in the aviation industry. And if you had any thoughts, Emery, that's really all I had.
Honestly, I've never flown a plane, and I have no desire to fly a plane. I have trouble enough getting in a plane and letting somebody else fly it. So But I think the analogy of flying by instruments to walking by faith is an excellent one. At least from my understanding of instrument flying and the conditions that you sometimes have to fly in, you're not going to be able to see the things around you necessarily, but if you trust the instruments, you should still be able to get to where you're trying to get. But
Yes, reference to Star Wars. I wanted to say Nephilim free. For some of my variety shows, I don't have. I usually select people in advance, but I think you have my email. If you ever want to have a show with me, we can talk. So for some of my pre-scripted shows, I choose to co-host in advance. So hope you're not offended. I don't run open mics because they've been getting bombed also.
yeah.
And then sometimes we get people that I might be friends with, but then they're not friends with each other. And that can cause all sorts of problems. So I actually found that we have, I've gotten feedback from the audience that they enjoy the shows where we just have like one co-host or something. That ends up being a little bit more structured, but because I have such admiration and respect for what you're doing, if you email me and you want to do a show on my channel, you're more than welcome to. We'll try to schedule something. So I just wanted to explain that. And I do have to tell you, I've since lost my nerve as you get older, you become a little more risk averse each year. And like, I don't even want to drive a car anymore. Anyway. So to the next topic in our show, Seeking God in Science, an atheist defends intelligent design. An atheist defends intelligent design. And I've tried, there was some of the criticisms the young earth creationists have thrown at intelligent design, or I can understand them, but I thought some of the hits were below the belt. But it is fair to say that a large body of very important intelligent design literature came from atheists. The most notable is Fred Hoyle, who used the word, specifically the phrase intelligent design in the 70s in his book Intelligent Universe. So this is way before all the stuff when the book Pandas and People and all the trials and legal proceedings that were associated with intelligent design. He wasn't actually an atheist who used the word. And it was Charles Darwin in one of his letters said that intelligent design has perplexed me beyond measure. So that phrase wasn't specifically created by the creationists to circumvent public school issues. That being said, I'll acknowledge they probably did try to package intelligent design to help them move forward the creationist argument in public schools. And, my feeling was that's not my fight. I was in the college sphere trying to, for intelligent design, and even Eugenia Scott said intelligent design was specifically organized to be argued at the college level. And I even have public correspondence between she and I. But it was specifically Fred Hoyle, who was an atheist and who was also critical of evolutionary theory and abiogenesis theory. He's the one who said about the probability of life emerging it's as unlikely as a tornado passing through a junkyard and creating a 747. Another reference to airplanes. You know how much I love airplanes. He said that. And the reason that I felt this was important is that he and others were noticing this too. Now, they wouldn't resort to God as an explanation. They would resort to things like space aliens or that nature itself is intelligent, which, at least I felt they were going in the right direction. But as a Christian, that made me notice. I said, if even he's seeing that, then how much more should, I be willing to consider this? So, maybe less than 1% of the ID community are atheists. but they have made a disproportionately large contribution to ID thought in terms of probability arguments and just kind of the general ideas. There's actually even a book by Hoyle, which I'll share. Emery, if you have any thoughts before I just put it on.
You and I take a slightly different approach to the ID. Like I'm kind of torn on them because I think they make a lot of good arguments, but at the same time I also go, guys, like, you just need to move the rest of the way here, right? Like, you don't. Why are you stopping there? So anyway,
and I will. I have a segment on that. Why I said, the importance of creationism is that it identifies. You have atheist intelligent design, and a lot of people don't realize it. And and there's pagan intelligent design. Even on Modern Day Debate, they had the Krishna guys. And then you have Christian intelligent design. Creationism identifies the designer as the Christian God. That's kind of the way I look at it.
Yeah.
But a lot of the theory, as far as maybe the older theories of like Socrates and Cicero, pagan.
Mm-hmm.
But like the atheist intelligent design had a lot of things in terms of like fine-tuning of the universe, which I think Christians are fine with, and also with the probability arguments. Hoyle was, I'm going to show this here. He wrote the book Mathematics of Evolution, and I think it could be criticized. A lot of population geneticists have criticized the book, but I think his intuitions were correct. Even if the way he framed it was a little off. And that's kind of my general feeling of a lot of the math. The intuition's correct. It's, the math needs to be made more rigorous. So if you had any more thoughts while I try to get this.
No, I think that, I'm not familiar with Hoyle's book, but I do think that the intelligent design movement has made significant positive contributions. In terms of some of the arguments that they put forward, Behe's irreducible complexity argument, I know it's not ideal, but it really did push the discourse forward. I know, Sal, you've got some issues with that, but in a sense, it really moved the needle in terms of the discussion when Behe brought that argument forward. And I don't think that the ID I don't know what I would say, obsession with trying to get ID in the colleges and public schools is terribly helpful because it's going to be taught by people who hate the idea.
Exactly.
So I don't think that's real helpful. But and this is why I don't think that why I don't bother fighting to try and get creation taught in the public schools. What's the point? The teacher's going to hate it and not going to represent it fairly. So no point at that point. And it's the same reason that I don't think evolutionists should try to force Christian schools to teach evolution if they don't want to. Now, I think you should teach evolution, but that's just my cup of tea on that. So yeah, but anyway, you've got the book up, Sal, so I'll let you go ahead.
I'm just having some problems with my own. Yeah, no, that's not. Let me just kill this. Dr. Dan requested. Sorry, I missed it each time so far. Can you show me that book again? Got to add it to the pile. And hang on.
That's a common refrain, by the way, Dr. Dan. Like every time Sal talks about a book, it goes in my pile too. Like I have this long list of books that I want to get, that a lot of which Sal has talked about at some point.
Seeking God in Science, an Atheist Defends Intelligent Design, and it's by Bradley Monton. Was that what you were asking for, Dr. Dan? Was it this book you were curious about? Seeking God in Science, an Atheist Defends Intelligent Design. Now, Dr. Dan, to be fair, I haven't read the book. I just happened to be cleaning my library out and trying to arrange things, and I stumbled on it. I said, I've never heard of this guy. He's not with the Discovery Institute. I said, how did I decide to buy that? And apparently some years ago, it was made a big deal. Personally, I felt Fred Hoyle was way more influential, and I did read his book, and I showed it here, and I'll show this title. Now, that being said, this book is, I own it, and it's math heavy. I would not. This is like what they call Stephen Hawking's book on time. They said it's the biggest bestseller that no one ever read. Okay, so this would be a book that you throw on the coffee table just to impress your friends. You don't actually read it. I think I got it, and it had all these elliptical integrals in it. I'm just like, oh yeah, this guy's definitely a mathematician, and that's just the way he thinks. I felt, and people know what my recommendation would be for ID literature. It's this book, The Stairway to Life, because that is written. The first edition was written actually for other PhDs in molecular biology. This one was written more for a college audience. So I would call that my favorite book. When Dr. Stadler and I come on this coming Wednesday, I'll talk about my approach to probabilities. And I actually have rejected Specified Complexity also by William Dembski. I was going to be his graduate student, and I think the world of Bill, and there's stuff that I agree with and disagree with. And I thought his Specified Complexity was not very helpful. It actually, I felt, kind of hindered the ID movement. And I'll give my alternative formulation to probability there. And you've actually heard me do it when I talk about the law of large numbers. So where was I with this? So we have this, we have chapter. I'll just read some of the chapters, highlights. If the audience will indulge me, I'll just read a little bit from the preface first. This book is not providing a full-fledged endorsement of intelligent design, but intelligent design needs to be taken more seriously than a lot of its opponents are willing to. Thoughtful people perceive the world as an amazing and mysterious place, and this has led to two sorts of reactions. One is to postulate that this world is the product of an all-powerful being, while the other is to investigate the details of how this world works, to dispel mystery with scientific understanding. While these two reactions are sometimes presented as divergent, they need not be. In principle, while investigating the details of how the world works, we could find evidence for the existence of its creator. While the intelligent design proponents typically don't put it quite that way, that's how I understand their motivation, to find scientific evidence for the existence of God. This is a worthwhile project, not to be dismissed out of hand. Ultimately, I don't think very much evidence is there, but the conclusion can only be reached after careful evaluation of the arguments. Evaluation of the sort I engage in Chapter 3. This, by the way, is why I'm an atheist. I just don't see very much evidence for the existence of God, and I'm not going to believe that God exists in the absence of good evidence. Philosophers are trained to be dispassionate evaluators of arguments, so it's especially unfortunate that so many of the objections that so many philosophers give against intelligent design arguments are unfair, emotionally driven, or not that well thought out. My goal is to do my best to look at the matters more objectively. Ultimately, I hold that the intelligent design arguments do not provide that much evidence for the existence of God or similar designer, but the arguments do have some force. They make me less certain of my atheism. They make me less certain of my atheism than I would be had I not heard the arguments. And so I think that's refreshing to hear that. That's refreshing to hear that. So he'll talk about, he was saying that this whole thing about intelligent design, they're saying it was concocted to get creationism and Christianity in the public schools and to make a theocracy. He said, well, that's all irrelevant to the actual argument itself. He said, bad people can make can make good arguments. And he felt he said, okay, let's just assume they're scoundrels that were promoting intelligent design. He said they still have arguments that need to be dealt with. And so that was one. And then he just examines a whole, it will read like an ID book. But for those that are maybe tired of kind of all the polemics and debate, I think that might be refreshing. Now, to be fair, especially Dr. Dan, since you expressed curiosity, I didn't read the book. I didn't read the whole book. I just stumbled on it because I was talking about atheist intelligent design. The book that I did read that was written by an atheist at the time who's since become a Christian, albeit Orthodox, was Frank Tipler's The Physics of Immortality, which was a follow-on to the book, The Anthropic Cosmological Principle. So since I mentioned it, let me just show the titles. This was actually a book review, was offered in the prestigious scientific journal Nature. And I have alluded to this book in my debates, most recently with James Downard and even with the anti-theists. I've said, if we just take the laws of nature and I even showed a slide of the 5 basic laws of nature, they would point to the conclusions that they're a reasonable interpretation, though not exclusively the only interpretation, is that God exists. And I cited researcher after researcher who said that, even though they are the minority position, there are a number who've put it forward and said, you can't write this off just because you don't like the conclusion. It's a very natural way to make coherence of the laws of nature. And one of the books that started to argue this was The Cosmological Anthropic Principle by John D. Barrow and Frank Tipler, and I'll show it here. And I'd categorize this in atheistic ID. But the problem is once you start to invoke an entity that's all powerful and omniscient and eternal, it's like, well, how's that not God? All right. Now, this particular book is interesting in that we've heard a lot about the many worlds hypothesis. The many worlds hypothesis. This one argues for an intelligent designer of many worlds. So it actually argues both for many worlds and also for an intelligent designer. And I believe I used to know, I think it's page 471, he actually gives the derivation of how we arrive at the existence of God. It's a variation of Schrodinger's equation. And I've shared that before. It's basically that there is a universal wave function, and there needs an observer to collapse the wave function. And it has to be something that's not made of the same substances as the material universe we have here. You need something different than the universal collapse. I'm not articulating that well, but this is a straightforward derivation. And so some people have said, well, that's the sort of God that even an atheist could love. And Frank Tipler himself at one time said, I'm an atheist. He put forward the theory as a hypothesis, as a speculative conjecture. And then thanks to me, actually, I suggested to a radio interviewer on the internet, said, why don't you talk to Frank Tipler? And he said, Salvador Cordova said, in your book, you mentioned you're an atheist, The Physics of Immortality. And I'll show that one. And by the way, Anthropic Cosmological Principle is a good book. It's a painful read. Even after graduate training in general relativity, quantum mechanics, and cosmology and astrophysics, I would have a hard time going back and reading that book. It was brutal. It was brutal. And I'll give another, the follow-on book is Physics of Immortality. So the two authors were John Barrow and Frank Tipler. Tipler's a respected scientist, and in my general relativity class, he was mentioned, and I'm just like, wow. So someone who's an ID advocate, I just thought that was the coolest thing. I said, someone who's an ID advocate is actually a respected scientist. And Tipler. Hang on, I'm sorry. I can't type and talk at the same time. Let me just try to get this. Let me try one more time. Otherwise, I'm going to hand it off to Emery, who can talk while I type. Let's see. I'm going to just show the book cover here. All right, I think I have it now. So I'll talk about physics of immortality here. That's the book, Physics of Immortality. And it's a terrible book. I'm sorry to say. It's a terrible book. It's interesting, but I thought his other book, Cosmological Anthropic Principle, was stronger. But in the book, he said he's, at this time, I'm an atheist, but, I think this hypothesis has a lot of strength. Well, anyway, so Tipler goes on this interview, and the interviewer says, yeah, Salvador Cordova recommended that I talk to you. And he pointed out that Tipler had mentioned in his book that he was an atheist. And Tipler said, well, I was at that point. I no longer am. I believe that we have had enough observational evidence to confirm my hypothesis that God exists. He called it the singularity. And it's very interesting because we studied singularities in general relativity. And I can grab this out of my physics book. He said, okay, these are the conditions where all laws of physics will break down. So we have singularities that are what we call mathematical, and those that are physical and actual. And this is predicted by Big Bang Theory. Now, granted, I don't believe in Big Bang Theory, but Tipler said that this singularity has to exist to make the cosmology work. And that's why when I was sitting in my general relativity class, I was kind of captivated that we were going through something about general relativity, and the professor mentioned Tipler favorably. And I'm just like, he is a big name. I got to respect when he says there's a singularity. And so a lot of people who are cosmologists have articulated the idea there has to be a singularity, which means, something where all the laws of physics break down. Now, Tipler went a little farther and said that identifies God. And then so combined with general relativity and quantum mechanics, both of them pointed to God. That's why I found the book interesting. And I did want to study cosmology, but I ended up in biology. So Emery, if you have any thoughts or questions, I'm going to look through the chat in case anyone has some comments.
I mean, this particular area, cosmology, math, physics, not my cup of tea. Yeah, so I avoid math, I avoid physics, I avoid cosmology as much as I can, just because I don't do the math real well. I do much better with biological math. So, but yeah, no, I do find it very interesting that someone like Tipler, who even I know is someone who stays out of cosmology, I at least knew his name, would be open to that perspective, just because he was forced there.
Yeah, and so he was a reluctant ID advocate. He talked about how he was ostracized, even when he was an atheist, and he was putting this forward because it's just a hot button. It's on. It does hit people where they are for some of them. Mm-hmm. And then he eventually wrote the book Physics of Christianity, which is also interesting. Not that that's an endorsement of his views. Right. I just thought that was interesting. So what does this have to do with Christianity? Well, it's kind of hard to explain this, but when someone from the other side is acknowledging that your point of view may have merit, that means a lot. So like when you and I were reading that essay, The Problems with Evolutionary Biology, and it was written by an evolutionary biologist, that resonated with me more than anything a lot of creationists have said. That just because you find that witness more credible because he's actually arguing against something he's defending. And if he's identifying points like that, it's like, yeah, he doesn't have an agenda in favor of my position. So when he speaks and he acknowledges something, it carries more weight. And so that's why I felt that even, the Christian community has a tendency to say, okay, if it's not written by Christians, I don't want to expose my kids to it. And I get that. But once they get into college, they're going to be exposed to all sorts of things. And so it's like what I said, who would you rather have as your biology teacher? Kent Hovind, Dr. Dan, or P.Z. Myers? And you and I said Dr. Dan.
Not even a question.
There you go. There, we're giving you a plug there, Dr. Dan. And so that's why I said this testimony is really important for creationists that, they're at the college level. They're not kind of the high schools where you do have, or even, like elementary school, when you do have to kind of coddle them a little bit more. But out at the college level, and I'll say this for those thinking about this, I was witnessing on the James Madison University campus, also near where one of my flight schools was, and an agnostic girl was saying, "I'd like to learn about problems with evolutionary theory and about agnostics who believe in God." So I recommended two books, Michael Denton's Evolutionary Theory in Crisis and Robert Jastrow's God and the Astronomers. And I was saying, oh Lord, I hope she doesn't try to read Michael Denton's book because it's hard. I think she'll like God and the Astronomers. Well, I saw her the next week. She said she checked it out at the library. And when she was approaching me about that, I said, Lord, should I give her Christian material or agnostic material? And I thought back to Acts 17 and the structure of how Paul tried to reach out to the pagans. He didn't appeal to the Bible. And I found that really interesting. He appealed to where they were and how they understood the world. And he appealed to the unknown God. And I said, okay, this is the approach. I said, Lord, I don't know if this is right, because all the preachers said, you just got to give them the right worldview, got to give them the Bible. I said, I'm going to give her Robert Jastrow. 6 weeks later, I saw her in the local church, and I asked, what's she doing here? I asked around. I asked some of the young ladies in church. They said, oh, she accepted Jesus Christ with many tears this last Friday. And so a few weeks later, I saw her again on campus, and we started talking, and she said, you know what, Salvador, that she'd seen a miracle. She related how she'd seen a miracle in high school, a great miracle of healing. And I could totally understand why she was interested in the Christian faith, because you witness a miracle, it does something to you. Her parents didn't want her to become a Christian, and they wanted her to avoid Christians, so they sent her to the Atheist Bible study. But I was attending the Atheist study, not Bible study. And she told me, she said, you helped me make that step of faith smaller because of what you did. You didn't give me a Christian book. You gave me something written by non-Christians. And that told me this could be real. So I just wanted to share that. And that's why that's kind of my plug for why it's valuable for creationists to look into what I call atheist ID. But in a larger kind of as a general principle, it's great to learn lots of other things. That's why you, Emery, are studying evolutionary biology. You will learn something about God's creation in the process. Mm-hmm. If you have any thoughts on that.
I mean, there's a reason that when I write my more heavy research stuff, I very rarely cite creationists, unless I'm specifically talking about a creationist idea. If I'm just talking about general biological ideas, I very rarely cite creationists, for the very simple reason that hostile witnesses are powerful. If a hostile witness says something that agrees with your position, it's clear that they're not doing it to help you. And I mean, one of my favorite quotes comes from Richard Dawkins, because he's talking about what natural selection can and can't do, and he says, no, it's just this blind process that Darwin discovered. It has no mind. I can't quote the whole thing, but I mean, anybody familiar with Dawkins probably know what passage I'm talking about. I love that, because thank you very much. Like, it doesn't have a purpose. It can't see things in advance. It can't see things coming down the road. I don't think he realizes how much he gave away when he said that, but things like that are great. And I get that Dawkins isn't a creationist. He probably never will be a creationist. And you know what? I mean, I can't, unfortunately, change his mind on that. But I appreciate the fact that he's intellectually honest enough to say some stuff that I can agree with. And that's why I read the peer-reviewed literature rather voluminously.
You do. I don't think I could do what you've done. Oh my goodness.
I sometimes wonder how I did what I did. But I mean, just on my own favorite pet topic, polyploidy, I have 4 brown binders sitting in the corner of my apartment of nothing but articles on polyploidy, all of which I've read and highlighted extensively. And that's just one topic. There are other brown binders sitting around. It's just, and the reason for that is, right now I just don't have time with grad school to dig into some of this other stuff. But, you know, the peer-reviewed literature is not your enemy, it's your friend. You just have to realize that you can't take every conclusion they come to at face value. But the data itself is very, 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 very interesting. And I mean, Sal, if you're okay with that, I'm happy to at least try to answer the question. I may or may not know what he's talking about. It's been a while since I've looked at those papers, but sure, I'll try. I'll take a stab at it. Go for it, Dr. Dan.
While we're waiting for him to type his question, and Dr. Dan, again, the invitation's open. If you want to have Anne-Marie and I and just hang out and talk somewhere, we can do that on your channel or mine. You have an open invitation.
Yes, I've read that article. I know exactly what you're talking about. I've read that article. I think that it's possible, but I'm kind of 6 of one, half dozen of the other on that, because we know that there are a lot of polyploid organisms today, and theoretically, at the theoretical level, that could mean a lot of extra genes if it was created. It could mean a lot of extra copies of alleles, and this would be particularly relevant in plants, because some plant families have just like insane amounts of variability.
Can I throw something in?
Sure, go ahead.
Actually, a creationist asked me that, and I Googled around. The funny thing was, it was proposed by evolutionary biologists that, like, diploid organisms, like humans, may have evolved from polyploid organisms.
That's actually a very common hypothesis to explain a lot of things.
Yeah.
That I see that quite frequently. That basically.
So this isn't really a creation. This wasn't a creationist thing again. This was something.
Right. It was kind of something, I guess you might be say, co-opted.
Yeah.
But like I've seen in the literature quite a bit with plant polyploidy where they'll say, you know, this there were multiple polyploid events in the past. Plants are all. Yeah, Dr. Dan's comment. Plants are all over the place. The plants are absolute, like, I love plants, but plant chromosomes are just like bizarro world. Like, chromosome counts on those things. I've seen like, what's the word for 10? Decaploids? I mean, it's just nuts. I think created heterozygosity is a good explanation for perhaps brain animals, and at least some animals. But I think creative polyploidy is a possible explanation. I think it needs to be fleshed out a lot more, though. If you've read the same article I've read out, I don't think that's fleshed out that far. But if there's been more fleshing out done on it that I haven't seen, I'd love to see it. But that's an argument I would love to see fleshed out a little bit more and get some depth to, because I think it's a very interesting possibility. And I apologize, Cheryl, for taking this to nerd heaven. I'll take it back down now.
Yeah. So I just wanted, back to the, and we'll revisit I'm going to close out this thing about atheist intelligent design. The Christian creationists are right to say, yeah, this is atheist, it's not Christian. And I'm totally fine with saying that. It's good we identify it. But I don't mean to say that we shouldn't study it. I feel it's important, and that the body of literature is very important actually for the Christian faith. Just like I would feel that it's important that biology students who are Christians and creationists should study evolutionary biology. They will get, they need to know it. But as far as atheistic ID, I think they'll really get something out of it, because there are things that are practically handed to you on a silver platter, like the fine-tuning arguments. And that's why Hoyle said, it seemed like there are no blind forces worth speaking of. Some super intellect must have been in charge of all this. And I said, yeah, you need to hear that. That's going to tell you something. Again, the hostile witness. So I felt a little irritated that Georgia Purdom and Terry Mortensen were just ragging on the ID movement. I said, I wish you'd stop being so like doctrinaire. We're talking about science here. And so probability arguments are not beholden to theology. That's one of the beautiful things. So a lot of the ID movement was just physics, chemistry, and probability. Not a lot of metaphysics. And I just wanted to say, just because calculus, the discipline of calculus, doesn't mention Jesus Christ, does that make it ungodly? I said, you have to look at the body of ID literature stripped of its metaphysics and look at it in terms of pure laws of physics, chemistry, and probability. And so I was a little bit, personally, I took a little bit of offense when they were, kind of the criticism that they were leveling against the Discovery Institute. I said, okay, you may disagree with them theologically, and that's, I respect that, on a personal level. Like, there are a lot of old Earth creationists in the Discovery Institute, or old Earthers, or like Michael Behe, who accepts universal common ancestry nominally, but it's not unchristian to study chemistry, physics, and probability from the standpoint of trying to elucidate engineering designs. So that's kind of where I was just going to close off that thought. If you have any final ones, we'll go on to nihilism and Nietzsche next in our variety show. So I told Cheryl we're going to de-nerd the conversation a little bit.
I just want to make one real quick comment to Dr. Dan as I'm reading the chat and try to catch up with the stuff that that he said. He says that the argument was basically, fine, you need more copies of stuff, fine, start with lots of copies and lose them over time. If you want to break it down that way, but the thing is, like, even in the polyploidy literature, like, I don't know how much you've read on polyploidy. I think I remember correctly, you're a virologist? I could be, if I'm wrong on that, I apologize. But there's a lot of talk about what is called diploidization, where the genome basically kicks out extra copies of genes over time. So it's perfect. The process itself is viable. Now, whether the math works, I have no idea. I haven't looked at the math. But at least the idea of starting with 4, 6, or however many copies and then breaking it down over time, that part at least is viable. So anyway, that's my 3 cents for the day. Anyway.
Okay, so I'm going to go to. I'm just going to read the wiki article. I'm really not into philosophy.
Where's Danny?
Oh gosh, and we all love Danny. We give him a hard time.
It's our favorite philosopher.
Okay, I mean, I like succinct and as clear arguments as, like for example, physics. You could put on one page all the major laws of physics. I said, this is telling you what we, if you wanted to say what are our articles of faith, I could write it down in one page. You look about, okay, so almost all physicists would agree that this represents the codified. In fact, I don't know if I might be able to show it here because I think I actually had it in my debate with James Downard. And by the way, I'm going to try to replay it here. I thought it went really well in terms of, we were very civil to each other. It didn't end up being the usual dumpster fires. And let me see if I have it here. And so I'm going to see if I have it. I'm going to show the laws of physics. But my point with this, we're going to go into nihilism, and everyone might have their slightly different definition. But I've been working with the team trying to push through a peer-reviewed paper, another one, and it's going to be in bioinformatics and structural biology. It'll be a real research, a deeper article than that little press release that was peer-reviewed, which isn't even really, not technically even an article. It's just saying, hey, look what our lab's doing. But anyway, we were spending 3 weeks just on a few equations saying, no, you should use that symbol. You should use that symbol. And we were going back and forth in the emails, having meetings. And what I'm going to show is when I talked about, see if I have it. Yes. That we could codify what most of the physicists on the planet will say. It's our articles of faith. And let me see if I could show it here. And I used this in my, by the way, this was actually from a ID proponent who put this together by the name of Walter Bradley. He's one of the founding fathers of the modern ID movement. And those are the 5 laws of nature. Now, that doesn't cover everything. I'm just saying this covers a lot. So this would be mechanics. Hamiltonian mechanics is a generalization of Newtonian mechanics. So Newtonian mechanics is actually inside that. Statistical mechanics, quantum mechanics, electrodynamics, and general relativity. And that's it on one page. So much of physics proceeds from that. So again, to pick on Danny, poor Danny.
He's not here to defend himself.
Yeah, I feel so bad. Our philosopher, it's like, that's what I find satisfying about math and physics is you don't get into these long disputes. You really don't. Like even in the dispute in my own internal group, it's like, we expect we're going to agree at the end. We just have to kind of clean up, some of it is just like, how do we express our ideas better? Because there are alternative ways to express an equation that are equivalent, but how do we think that this will communicate? But we're really, we totally, expect we're going to arrive at the same conclusion. That's why when we do math theorems, we expect that the right answer will be arrived at independently by whoever does it if he follows the rules correctly. So that's just that's kind of my explanation why I have a distaste for philosophy. It's like, can you just tell me what you think is right? And it'd be heartening if you all could agree on what's right for a change rather than having a diversity of opinion. And so that being said, I'm now going to read, Emery, you are the reader. Could you try doing this?
Sure. I actually didn't open the wiki page, so can you link the wiki page real quick, and then I'll read.
It's just the one on nihilism.
Nihilism.
And I'm going to just, you can read the opening paragraphs. You don't have to get deep into it. And I might.
Well, I'd get so lost if I tried to.
So if you, I hope you won't be offended if I just interrupt. Say just skip that. So go ahead and share your screen, and we'll do a little philosophy here.
Oh boy, this is just what I want for my day. Is philosophy.
But the reason I'm pointing it out, okay, so let's tie it to the Bible. What does it say? Paul said, if the dead are not raised, we apostles should be pitied above all men. If Christ be not raised. And if the dead are not raised, let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. And that eat and drink for tomorrow we die that's kind of nihilistic. That means there's just, once life's over, that's it. And once humanity's over, that's it. And it can lead, I think it leads to nihilism. And the Bible just succinctly said it, let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. And that is kind of my interest in, Christianity. It's like something in my heart said I love the thought of eternal life. And especially now recently with my mother's passing, the thought that she's in heaven with God I find that very comforting. And I'd like to believe it because it's true, not because, not because I just want to believe it. I want to believe it because it has evidence. So that being said, I'll put this up, and thank you. Emery's a better reader than I am. And if you could kind of make it larger so I can't.
Sure, let me pop this up a little bit. Is that helping?
Yeah. Just one more notch. Okay, thanks.
All right. Nihilism. Nihilism, from Latin nihil, nothing, is a philosophy or family of views within philosophy expressing negation, i.e. denial towards general aspects of life that are widely accepted within humanity, such as objective reality. Such as objectively real. Within humanity, objectively real, such as knowledge, existence, and the meaning of life. Different nihilist positions hold variously that human values are baseless, that life is meaningless, that knowledge is impossible, or that some set of entities do not exist. The study of nihilism may regard it as merely a label that has been applied to various separate philosophies, or as a distinct historical concept arising out of nominalism, skepticism, and philosophical pessimism, as well as possibly out of Christianity itself. Contemporary understanding of the idea stems largely from the Nietzschean crisis of nihilism, which derives from the two central concepts, the destruction of higher values and the opposition to the affirmation of life. Earlier forms of nihilism, however, may be more selective in negating specific hegemonies of social, moral, political, and aesthetic thought. The term is sometimes used in association with anomanie, I probably butchered that, to explain the general mood of despair at a perceived pointlessness of existence or arbitrariness of human principles and social institutions. Nihilism has also been described as conspicuous in or constitutive of certain historical periods. For example, oh boy, any French people out there, I apologize. Jean Baudrillard? Maybe? And others have characterized postmodernity as a nihilistic epoch or mode of thought. Likewise, some theologians and religious figures have stated that postmodernity and many aspects of modernity represent nihilism by a negation of religious principles. Nihilism has, however, been widely ascribed to both religious and irreligious points of view. In popular use, the term commonly refers to forms of existential nihilism, according to which life without intrinsic value is without intrinsic value, meaning, or purpose. Other prominent positions within nihilism include the rejection of all normative and ethical views, moral nihilism, the rejection of all political institutions, political nihilism, the stance that no knowledge can or does exist, epistemological nihilism, and a number of, how do they know that, by the way? And a number of metaphysical positions which assert that non-abstract objects do not exist. which is
Good point there, Emery. How did they know that?
so yeah, that's why I hate postmodernity. It literally blows itself up like this.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So, yeah, the postmodern modernity, I don't, yeah, I'm right there with you. Now, the idea of life being meaningless, I mean, just at a personal level, when I was doubting the existence of God, I said I could either live life like God exists, because if he doesn't, I don't have any meaning in life. I'm just going to live for the now and eat and drink.
Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die.
Yeah, yeah. It's sad to say this, but back in my casino days, I saw that. I said, "Why are you guys here? You're just losing your money. You're not, it's like you guys are making my living, And right. I felt kind of guilty about that. That's one of the reasons I was glad to finally leave that scene, because you begin to see sides of humanity you don't want to look at. I saw this poor widow that was just sitting there every day, and the casino was just pounding her into the ground. And I'm just like, is your life so bad and so meaningless? You're just here every day. I mean, isn't there something more to live for? And I realized for a lot of these people, that's exactly it. This was the best life that they had. And and when I began to see that, my heart really went out to them. I began to see sides of humanity that kind of made me feel very sad for them, because and then I'd find out these stories. I'd see a lot of people. I'm sorry.
Oh, I didn't say anything. I apologize.
I see there's a scene where it's a real scene. It's almost something you'd want to put in a novel. And I was actually trying to write kind of a novel, maybe one chapter, where I said, we in the casino world, we have what we call the players, the advantage players. That would be like me. We use our math skills. And everyone else is what we call ploppies, because they just get in the chair and plop down. I know it's very okay. So there's kind of a stratification, and there was an arrogance on our part. The advantage player just looked down on the ploppies. And I was writing about a ploppy I saw at a slot machine, and she was smoking a cigarette. She was on a respirator, not a respirator. What do you call that? Oxygen. She had these oxygen things. Yep. I said, they usually have stage 4. At that point, they have stage whatever COPD, and that's why they're on oxygen, or they're recovering from lung cancer or something. And she's there smoking a cigarette. I shouldn't laugh. Goodness, that's so cruel.
I mean, I would have been afraid to get near her in case that oxygen tank exploded.
Yeah, it could catch fire. They said it could. I don't know that it explode, but there's. I don't want to be the one to find out. But anyway,
yeah, me neither.
And I'm just like, okay, that's a ploppy. She's sitting at a slot machine, and she's probably blown her lungs out by smoking a cigarette. That's why she has oxygen, and she's still smoking a cigarette. Could light herself up on fire. And I said, that's your typical casino patron. And I was like, yeah, what else, don't you have? And I found out some of the stories that some people said, yeah, they're diagnosed as terminally ill. And they said, yeah, why don't I do something I never would have done before? Let's go to a casino. I'm just like, that's the last place I want to be. I'm here to make money. I'm not really here and I like the game, but I didn't like all the smoking, drinking, and gambling. The mathematics was what was attractive to me, but the behavior of the patrons there, the rowdy behavior, I wasn't into that. Now, if I didn't get kicked out in the casinos, I'd still be there, and you wouldn't have me here with you. So, but that's where I was headed with. That's the nihilism that's the way that I had defined nihilism. I didn't know that about these other nuances of nihilism. Like there's you can't know anything, and postmodernism and all the, and I actually even saw in this article stuff about Buddha. So why don't we can go on and let's just see if there's anything kind of interesting.
Sure.
I don't want to spend too much time on this.
I mean,
So we don't have to go into, I thought the Buddha one is interesting.
the section on Buddhism. Okay,
yeah.
The concept of nihilism was discussed by the Buddha, and as recorded in the Theravada and Mahayana Tripitaka. I apologize to any Buddhists out there. I can't. The Tripitaka, originally written in Pali, refers to nihilism as, okay, I'm not even trying that word. Not even going to try. Sorry. And the nihilist view as another word I can't pronounce. Various sutras within it describe a multiplicity of views held by different sects of aesthetics while the Buddha was alive, some of which were viewed by him to be morally nihilistic. In the doctrine of nihilism, in more words I can't pronounce, the Buddha describes moral nihilists as holding the following views. Giving produces no beneficial results. Good and bad actions produce no results. After death, beings are not reborn into the present world or into another world, and there is no one in the world who, through direct knowledge, can confirm that beings are reborn into this world or into another world. The Buddha further states that those who hold these views will fail to see the virtue in good mental, verbal, and bodily conduct, and the corresponding dangers in misconduct, and will therefore tend towards the latter. That seems to be a fairly common sense assessment.
I just found that interesting in that describes kind of the things that we would hear for some atheists saying that there's no meaning or purpose in the universe. It kind of had echo those themes. So where I wanted to go, and I said I'm not going to belabor this, can we look at the wiki entry for Nietzsche, who is Mr. Nihilist?
Sure, let me. I have no clue how to spell his name, so I'm going to
Nietzsche.
I just cheated. I used the wiki links.
Oh.
I have no clue how to spell this guy's name. I can pronounce it, but I can't spell it. So where do you want to go on this particular page?
Now, hang on. Let me look through it.
Sure.
I'm sorry. He is a very revered philosopher, and like you would expect for a philosopher, his wiki page is really long.
Yeah, because other philosophers are the ones writing it. Why do you think it's long? Because nobody else is reading him. It's just a bunch of people like Danny.
Oh goodness!
Sorry,
so
Danny.
Where would I like you to start? I'm like, I didn't think it would take me this long to pick out the spot, but there's so much. Oh goodness. Okay, Danny, I'm sorry to pick on you. We love you, brother.
Yeah.
You know, even I think I'm verbose, and I'm just like nothing like the philosophers.
Yeah. I'm convinced that not every philosopher, but I'm convinced a lot of philosophers are just people who like hearing themselves talk, and other people don't understand what they're saying, so they pretend like it's profound.
I tell you what, why don't we just do, because I don't want to bore the viewers while.
Right.
How about while I'm reading a paragraph, you look for one paragraph you think interesting, and I'll read one paragraph. So I'll share the paragraph I think is interesting, and then we can do that a couple rounds, and then we'll move on. But Dr. Sandy Pigeon said, he felt Nietzsche was a closet Christian, and I understand why he had those sentiments, because it echoed stuff that Peter Hitchens was saying about the breakdown of society. But I found this one interesting. And I would. Oh, Nietzsche suggests that the universe is recurring over infinite time and space, and that different versions of events that have occurred in the past may take place again. Hence, all configurations that have previously existed on the Earth must yet meet. With each repeat of events is the hope that some knowledge or awareness is gained to better the individual. Hence, and thus it will happen one day that a man will be born again, just like me, and a woman will be born, just like Mary. Only that it is hoped that the head of this man may contain a little less foolishness. So there's kind of a many worlds hypothesis that wasn't even really my main point. That just leaped out at me.
It's kind of almost a reincarnation with retained past knowledge. Like that, it's almost, that kind of sounds like the Nietzschean. It kind of sounds like what he's saying. Now, again, I'm not a philosopher. I freely admit to not being a philosopher or understanding much of philosophy. But I mean, that seems to be what he's saying. Now, this is actually there's actually two paragraphs I want to read here, Sal, because I think they're relevant to the section we just read from Nihilism. So, one such reaction to the loss of meaning is what Nietzsche called passive nihilism, which he recognized in the pessimistic philosophy of Schopenhauer. At least I can pronounce that. Schopenhauer's doctrine, which Nietzsche also referred to as Western Buddhism, advocates separating oneself from will and desires to reduce suffering. Nietzsche characterized this aesthetic attitude as a will to nothingness. Life turns away from itself as there is nothing of value to be found in the world. This moving away of all value in the world is characteristic of the nihilist, although in this, the nihilist appears to be inconsistent. This will to nothing is still a disavowed form of willing. And then there's a quote from Nietzsche here. A nihilist is a man who judges that the real world ought not to be, and that the world as it is ought to do not exist. According to this view, our existence, action, suffering, willing, feeling, has no meaning. This is vain in nihilist pathos, an inconsistency on the part of the nihilist. And then next paragraph. Nietzsche approached the problem of nihilism as a deeply personal one, stating that this problem of the modern world has become conscious in him. Furthermore, he emphasized the danger of nihilism and the possibilities it offers as seen in this statement. I do not reproach nihilism's arrival. I believe it is one of the greatest crises, a moment of the deepest self-reflection of humanity. Whether man recovers from it, whether he becomes a master in this crisis, is a question of his strength. According to Nietzsche, it's only when nihilism is overcome that a culture can have true foundation on which to thrive. He wished to hasten its coming only so that he could also hasten its ultimate departure. Heidegger interpreted the death of God with what he explained as the death of metaphysics. He concluded that metaphysics had reached its potential and that the ultimate fate and downfall of metaphysics was proclaimed with the statement, God is dead. But that doesn't seem to be what Nietzsche's arguing. Now I'm talking to myself here. It seems to be what Nietzsche is basically saying is, look, metaphysics can't keep a culture alive. Well, not metaphysics, nihilism can't keep a culture alive, and that's honestly where we are with postmodernity. Nothing has meaning. And so I can kind of see where Sandy's coming from when you read that statement, because it really sounds like Nietzsche's saying, yeah, man needs to overcome nihilism, so we're going to try and get it here as fast as we can, and then once it's here, the sooner it goes away, essentially. Now, I think that's a terrible idea, but if you believe that nihilism is inevitable, but it will eventually be replaced by something else, I could understand why you would want to hasten it coming, and then maybe hopefully get rid of it faster. So, I mean, it's interesting. Again, this is why I don't read philosophy, because you could read that 5 different ways and probably come up with 6 different meanings. But, it's one of those things. I stay out of philosophy.
Emery, I apologize. I was
trying
to find the paragraph. I forgot to put your...
No, that's fine. That's fine.
What I had wanted, there was a passage, and someone who's a scholar in this would understand this better than me, but there was a passage in that Wikipedia article is just talking about he actually foretold the breakdown of morality, therefore culture, that he anticipated all the tyrannies that we were seeing in the 20th century with the wars and the mass murders, because the loss of the valuation of life. And I can't find it, and I feel bad. I may have to just defer that to another show. But people had thought that this was very prophetic, that he was foreseeing what was going to happen in the 20th century wars. So I apologize to the reader. I thought I'd be able to find it just like that, and I can't. So I'm going to try one more time. If you had any thoughts while I look for this, otherwise I'm just going to have to give up.
No, honestly, Sal, I don't I don't have a philosophy is really just a dark zone for me. So I stay out of it. I really do. Like I'm not philosophically astute enough to really comment on this. I'd like to pretend I am, but it would end badly. So I won't even try.
Yeah.
Where's Danny when we need him?
Yeah.
Because I'm sure he would know what passage you were talking about. I guarantee you, Danny could probably tell you what page number it was on.
Yeah. So I'm going to give it one last try, and I apologize to the viewers that I didn't have this on hand. But the point is the larger idea that, again, this whole thing I was saying is that there are no answers in atheism. If you don't have a basis in values, if you have an unstable basis of what's right and wrong, and it's up to humans to decide, you'll eventually have these tyrannical governments. And apparently Nietzsche had totally foreseen that. This is what happens when you remove moral foundations from a society, and especially the Christian foundations. When life is no longer valued, the individual is no longer valued. And so when I've been debating these atheists, I said, well, what does it have to offer? And Matt Dillahunty said freedom. And I was just like, yeah, we'll see how far that goes if you have a society full of atheists who can't agree on what's right and wrong. There was an interesting debate where we had atheists debating the abortion issue, and Skylar Fiction defended the unborn, and I was like, good on him. But it proved that a lot of decisions about right and wrong can't be decided with a scientific experiment. You can't derive morals from the laws of physics, and I showed the equations. And I said, what ends up happening is, if the morals are grounded by people's whims and they're the final arbiter, because if there's no God to be the lawgiver, it's just like what Richard Dawkins said, you make up your own meaning. And if we have an atheistic society that everyone's making up their own meaning, there probably is not going to be uniform agreement, and the people in power will be able to, then impose what they believe is right and wrong, and usually to their self-interest. And you see these tyrannical governments rise up. So I'm not saying that we won't see tyrannical governments of other religions. I'm not saying that, but I'm merely pointing out it's not going to be the utopia that they're promising.
Yep.
So that's all I had on that. I have a one on the evolutionary problem posed by the backward wiring. So what was my first title? Did I talk about the fish vagina? Okay. This is only going to be a 5-minute segment, but I thought you might find it interesting. I wouldn't say that this is like one of my favorite arguments against evolution. I would just just to get people to think a little bit. And so I'm going to show this diagram here. Where's the diagram I wanted? Here it is. Okay. I should have saved it for this talk rather than Googling it. So this is going to be a very short segment, but I think this has the catchiest headlines. Oh, and Dr. Dan's gonna, yeah, thank you, Dr. Dan, for visiting. All right, it's a late night, gotta call it tonight. Fun chat, and Dr. Dan, the invitation's open. If you ever want to just chat about things, write me. I'll tell you if it's something I can chat about. I know you wanted to talk about the H1N1 virus, and I don't have anything to say. I probably would not do my side justice. So thank you for dropping in. Nietzsche valorized cruelty and saw few other standards than power. On some level, he doesn't just prophesy at these despots. He longed for them. Oh my goodness. Wow. And Ray Giordano says, postmodernism is nuts. What do you get when you cross a mafioso with a postmodernist? Someone who makes you an offer you can't understand. All right. Thank you. All right. So the fish vagina and backward wiring. I knew that got a lot of attention. So let me try to share my screen here. Hang on. Okay. Now, if you just, I actually had another like diagram of a female human, but you can kind of get, if you can kind of think about this. So if you start off with, like, say, the mouth, and then the heart, and then the stomach, and then you get the anus here. Do they have it? They don't show it. This is the wrong diagram. Apologies. Let me drop this one. I had a better diagram. Hang on. Hang on. And if I'm messing this up, feel free to everyone to correct me. All right, here it is. Okay, try again. So we have the mouth, and then the heart, and then the stomach, and then the anus, and the urogenital opening, which is like the vagina. Do you see now? If they said that humans evolved for fish, do you see something that has to transition differently? Emily?
I see a few things that would need to transition on there, but I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. So I was saying, and please don't take this too seriously. Don't make it a serious creation argument. But there are some interesting things about how fish reproduce, because the males, in some males, there is what they call an introgression organ, which is analogous to the penis. Okay. Sorry, I have to use mature terms here, but this is just an anatomy lesson. I'm not going to try to get, I'm going to try to treat the topic respectfully, because I do want to be family friendly, but still this is important biology to consider. So I was saying, that the male fish thinks he sees his dream girl, but she has her parts reversed. You know, what mutation would there cause to make her parts reverse order? You know, because it has to eventually evolve into a human that has a different order of the private parts, okay? But then he sees this girl fish that has her private parts different. And the girl fish looks at him and thinks he's a prospect. And as he gets closer, he goes, sorry, hun, it's not you, it's me. And then he scurries off because, that was a polite way of saying, hey, you have an issue there. And I don't want to be, I want to be sensitive. There are people that do have birth defects in this area. And, I want to be sensitive, and I'm not trying to be offensive here. So this is a problem. And I did notice that what would you say the selection pressure is for getting this to be reversed? Now, there is something they call the cloacal phase. The cloaca, there are some creatures that will, like in a bird, what's equivalent to the anus and the genitals is connected, and they call that a cloaca. And I'm not, this part of the biology I'm not really that familiar with, but I guess the story would have to be is that the way they got reversed, they became a cloaca and then emerged in the way you see it in a human being. And in the development of an embryo to, becoming, as the fetus develops, it goes through what they call the cloacal phase, where it does create a cloaca, and then it has to go out of that. If it doesn't go out of that, it creates a birth defect. And so some people will say, well, that's evidence of evolution. But what I'll say is maybe the creatures are laid out. Some creatures have just only cloaca, and then some don't, like humans. But yet the human goes through a cloacal phase. I would say that those creatures that have the cloaca are God's gift. Remember, I was saying that the similarities are built there so we could do scientific discovery. If we want to study the cloacal phase, we should study animals that have cloaca. That might help us understand, like say, primate development. But that's all I had. That's really all I had to say. I wanted to show that picture because the evolutionists have insisted we descended from fish. And I looked at that. I kind of laughed. I said, you do see something that's not quite right, don't you?
Well, I mean, there is. I guess you have to ask the question: what fish did we descend from? Because you're now getting into all kinds of, with just that particular issue, anatomical issues. Because like some fish, there's a particular species, some of the species of fish that I keep, the males have external sex organs called gonopodium, so which they use to fertilize the female. So was it a live bearer like that? Was it a non-live bearing fish like I believe that, what is that, a carp or a perch or something like that? I'm not entirely sure. That you've got up on the screen. Was it a non? I mean, there's so many different reproductive modes in fish, and we also have to point out the fact that fish a lot of them can change genders. Why did that get selected against? So there's a lot of questions you got to be asking about this, and a lot of times you just ask critical thinking questions, the whole story starts to crumble apart because you only got to pick out one or two little pieces for the whole house of cards to fall down.
All right, anyway. So we're I can't believe that this stream is already almost 2.5 hours. I didn't think that we could find so much to talk about. We have only one topic left on the docket, and that's the single biopolymer paradox. And if you have something else you wanted to talk about briefly while I get my slides ready, and
sure,
maybe we'll close out in 15 minutes.
I can do that, sure. So since my nerd brain is thinking polyploidy here, I'm going to try and simplify polyploidy for everybody in the chat, because I know that we went on a nerd session here earlier, and nobody probably, other than maybe Dr. Carter, knew what we were talking about. So polyploidy, for those of you, sorry, Godzilla, I just saw that. But no, the polyploidy is basically having more than 2 copies of your chromosomes. And that means every chromosome, not just one. So like Down syndrome is called trisomy 21 because you have 3 copies of chromosome 21. Polyploidy is where you have 3 or more copies of every chromosome. So basically you just duplicate the whole genome. It's referred to as a whole genome duplication. Now, when you start with a whole genome duplication, and when you start with a diploid organism and you duplicate the whole genome, you're not really creating any new information. You're just basically doubling up on what's already there. And as I've said previously, the only thing that the duplicate copy is useful for, unless there's some dosage compensation going on, which is another topic, mostly the duplicated copy is basically about as good as having a second copy of the newspaper. You can use the second copy of the newspaper to, swat flies, or maybe use it as kindling for your grill, but you're not going to learn anything from the second copy of the newspaper as that you couldn't learn from the first copy. Now, genes do have something called dosage compensation, where you have more than one copy. The dosage it basically can change expression a little bit. So there is something there, but it's not a one-to-one analogy, but it's a fairly close analogy. And the argument that Dr. Dan brought up was that basically, and this has been, I think Answers in Genesis has 2 articles on this. They're nerd articles. I've read them. They're good articles, I think, but they're nerd articles, so you would have to have a little bit of background in genetics, I think, to understand what's going on. But basically, the argument is, hey, 2 copies, instead of having 2 copies of chromosomes in the beginning, particularly for plants, which there are a lot of polyploid plants, you would have maybe 6 copies or 8 copies, or however many copies. And over time, some of those copies could have been lost, or maybe they're even still retained in some kinds. But that would provide more genetic diversity at the beginning, which would then decrease over time through extinction and just general genetic drift fading out of the population. So, Sal, are you ready to go?
Yes.
And yes, Dr. Carter, that is absolutely accurate. Some of the sorry, Sal, I'll shut up here in a second.
No, go on.
Some of the deep sea sexual dimorphisms are just, some of the deep sea just morphology is bizarro. Look up tripod fish sometime. But these guys, he's absolutely right about this. The sea anglers, the females are huge, and basically the male is a parasite. The male will hook onto the female, will essentially bite her, and his whole body will fuse to her. And their blood will run together. He will get nutrients through her, and he will provide gametes. That's essentially how it works. He latches onto her with his teeth and just hangs on for the rest of his life. And they will literally fuse into one organism. It is that weird.
That's literally devouring passion.
Ah!
I just had to crack a joke.
Oh, stop. Anyway, go ahead with what you want to talk.
Well, so our last topic for today, and I actually, it's been a fun night, and I'm actually kind of glad we're doing variety shows, because the hope is at least we hit one topic that is meaningful to someone there. Because honestly, polyploidy just bores me to death, and I was like, oh boy.
I'm sorry, Sal.
If it's boring me, I said, I can't imagine what it's like for everyone else. And Dr. Dan was just so fascinated with it. And I didn't even talk about GE, genetic entropy.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. And he probably was waiting here. How did I miss that? I'm embarrassed. I think I was just, all right, the show's not closing because I was supposed to talk about Michael Lynch and Brian Sykes. Let me read, let me see if I could multitask here. If I can get my, I'm going to read a passage from Michael Lynch. And Dr. Dan, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Dr. Dan. You probably came out just to hear me talk about genetic entropy, and I didn't get around to it. I'll make it up to him by saying it now. There are various formulations of genetic entropy, and what I've tried to suggest to creationists is like, as much as we all revere Dr. Sanford, he doesn't quote himself a lot. He quotes evolutionary biologists to make his case. All right, so let's just try to follow Dr. Sanford's example. Again, this whole thing of the hostile witness, because and I had an interview I posted here where I interviewed him, one of the few, he rarely grants interviews. And I think I had a little pull because I actually worked for him. I could ask him for a 10-minute interview. And I said, just say something that might encourage people. And that really is my goal. And he just, his standard interview, I said, tell the people here, who you are and how you became a Christian. And in high school, he studied evolution, and that destroyed his faith. And he was an atheist, what we call a romantic atheist, not a nihilistic atheist. A romantic atheist believes that, we live in a tragic world, but we're going to make it better. We might even be able to reset the universe. Okay. Which, obviously now that he's farther along in science, he knows that was just a dream. But a romantic atheist tries to be a little bit more hopeful. And as a Christian, I could relate to that. When I had believed in evolution, growing up as a child in a Catholic home, I said, that's really cool. The bacteria become like a fish. The fish becomes some sort of mammal. Mammal becomes a human being, and we just keep progressing, and evolution will just keep making the universe better and better. Okay, that was a very naive view, but I was just a kid. But that's how I viewed it, because I saw these pictures of improvement. And so Dr. Sanford was a romantic atheist. He believed things would be better. He went to graduate school, and on his way to getting a PhD, and he said one thing that struck him was that one of his professors said that, there's one big problem we haven't solved, and that's mutational load. How is it that we're alive? The reproductive rate of certain species has to be able to outpace the number of deleterious mutations that are being introduced. And I want to read something by Michael Lynch, and I'll put it up here. I'll make it bigger so people can see it. I hate the way Reddit just... The advertisement's bigger than the text. Okay.
So you could have stopped that sentence with, I hate Reddit, and you would have been fine.
Oh. Okay, this is from the prestigious scientific journal Nature. Within the field of population genetics, the phenomenon of mutational meltdown, in which a population may become extinct owing to the accumulation of deleterious mutation, has been well studied both theoretically and experimentally. The key to understanding this effect is a consideration of the efficacy of natural selection. Because there are many more ways to disrupt rather than to improve genomic function, the vast majority of new fitness impacting mutations are deleterious rather than beneficial. Thus, if mutation rates are increased, the result is a disproportionate excess variants that are detrimental to the organism, because natural selection will not be able to purge this input of deleterious mutations. If the mutational pressure is sufficiently large, these variants may remain in the population and even reach fixation. This deleterious load further restricts the ability of natural selection to purge additional variants, allowing more deleterious mutations to accumulate and fix, and so on, a snowball effect that can result in the eventual loss of the population, mutational meltdown. And I posed a rhetorical question. Does that remind you of a certain creationist? Any thoughts there, Emery?
Trying not to die laughing. I mean, again, hostile witness.
I mean, okay, if a creationist said something like that, they'll attack you.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do when an evolutionist points it out? And okay, so I will qualify this. We've tried to, there's been talk about how far we can extend genetic entropy, and I think I've said this publicly. I said I was concerned trying to extend it to viruses was, taking risk. I mean, it might be right. It's great to put it as a hypothesis, but because Dr. Sanford is in a very special position as a creationist, they will take a scientific hypothesis and just try to rip it to shreds. And even in his original, his 2008 version or 2012 version of genetic entropy, he said, possibly viruses could be exempted from genetic entropy. So he actually tried to just explore the topic in viruses. Now, the passage I read, so let me share it again. Guess what this was applied being, was this describing human human genetic entropy? And it's kind of, I was like, I'm glad you were laughing, Emery, because this was you got the point. And look at this. Considering mutational meltdown as a potential SARS COVID treatment strategy.
I'm sorry I'm laughing so hard, Sal, but I literally said this when this whole thing started. I said the faster this thing mutates, the quicker it's going to wipe itself off the planet from meltdown.
Okay, so in deference to Dr. Dan, who, we're on good terms now. We had some, in the Reddit days, we were at each other's throats, but once we got to talk and debate in person, became more civil. And that's why I think the Twitterverse, which is purely text driven, can just create a lot of friction.
Yeah, that's true.
Text wars. When you actually see a person, you just tend to behave better. And hence, I can imagine that your inbox will be full of a lot more vitriol than if they'd talked to you in person. But that's another topic. So Dr. Sanford got a lot of grief about him suggesting that mutational meltdown is a mechanism for eliminating H1N1. But no, if we quote a evolutionist, it's, oh man, this is brilliant. So let me just show it again. Mutational meltdown is basically a way to eliminate a virus. Now, again, what really does concern us as humans is, can humans have a mutational meltdown? And so Michael Lynch basically, he outlined how this might happen for any species. If there's enough load, any species could melt down. And he's citing an increase in mutation rates. The problem is that if you just take the existing mutation rates, either anything we've measured or in evolutionary literature, like when they accept the chimpanzee human kind of, the ancestor splitting, and you infer a mutation rate from that, depending on the level of functionality in the human genome, it'll raise questions about our viability. And as some geneticists have said, like Kondrasov, who worked at the NIH, who's a colleague of my professor, when I was studying bioinformatics, he said, why aren't we dead 100 times over? And they kind of, my feelings about population genetics. And we had this whole 5.5-part series that probably was a total of 10 hours of nerd heaven or nerd hell, depending on how you look at it. The evolutionary definition of fitness being tied to reproductive success masks the problem of genetic deterioration. You can actually be having more offspring, but your genome is getting trashed. The species genome collectively is being trashed. And so Kondrasov's solution to this was kind of more one of those where it's a recovery of getting enough reproduction, but it could be that the genome still gets trashed. And that hasn't been sufficiently analyzed. What if we redefine fitness as actual kind of on functional levels? And then also include the possibility, as Michael Behe pointed out, beneficial mutations tend to be loss of function. Now you throw that into the mix, where complexity is being selected against. That means there's going to be more loss of function, loss of genes. And we see that definitely in all sorts of creatures, especially microbes. What happens then? And so when we consider that, I don't think I'd want to be arguing in favor of the human genome improving. I don't know any major geneticist that thinks that. So I laid that out there, and that's basically genetic entropy without getting into the heavy math of it. And so I opened the show and said, testable predictions. This is a testable prediction. Now with all the gene sequencing we can do, we can actually track whether there's a net rise of heritable diseases across generations. And I don't think anyone is doubting we're going to see this. Even Michael Lynch, who I was just quoting, says in 200 years, this is going to be irreversible. We're going to get so much damage, it's irreversible. And we can cite, we know people are saying our IQs are declining. We're getting dumber and dumber. And to quote someone, maybe to save the human race, we get dumber and dumber and lose our minds. To quote someone who shall not be named. You're laughing. Hey, let it out, Emery. You don't have to hide your laughter.
Yes, because I know exactly what clips I was referring to.
Yes. Now, I mean, this isn't really a laughing matter, but it's one of these things. It's like, well, because we're dying, it's actually telling us when our Lord and Savior said, this world is passing away.
Yeah.
And then also, if we take a little literal reading of Christ's genealogy, that means humanity's young.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that mean? The Bible, the witness of the Bible was inspired by God. Mm-hmm. Because this is not something that would have, someone had to tell these primitive fishermen and the variety of people that made the writers of the gospel, had to tell them that there was a divine origin. They wouldn't have had modern science to have taught them this. And so, I've tried to look at some of the thought in Darwin's time. They thought the thought is the universe is eternal and progress is eternal too. And of course, that's at variance with what the Christian message. And just recently in the Bible study on this Wednesday, Peter said, "This world is passing." And then I was quoting Corinthians, "This world is passing." You can quote the Gospels, "This world is passing." And I said in the description, there's Brian Sykes, and he's an Oxford geneticist. He did work on mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosomal Adam. He wrote Adam's Curse and also the book Seven Daughters of Eve. He's giving humanity about 100,000 years. And I don't think it really dawned on him. It's like, okay, if you give humanity only 100,000 years, why aren't we dead 100 times over? Because there's no way we would have evolved from a primate ancestor. So that again is like, okay, this is how we through kind of these creationist arguments, we identify the intelligent designer as the Christian God. It's not the atheist ID. It's not the pagan ID. It's Christian intelligent design. And that also ties with Noah's flood. To the extent that we're able to establish more evidence for Noah's flood, it strengthens the case for the intelligent designer being the Christian God. So I forgot to say all this, and maybe just as well, God has a reason that I had that oversight. So now we can go to Benner's single biopolymer paradox. But Emery, do you have any thoughts? I'm glad I got a laugh out of you sharing Michael Lynch.
Well, I mean, anytime you talk about the evolutionists themselves basically admitting that genetic entropy is a thing, I'm gonna get a laugh out of it, because they always, I hear this from the Evos in particular, frequently, where it's the Evo atheists in particular, where it's like, oh, well, genetic entropy is not a real thing, and then Sanford made that up and all that. You guys, if you'd actually read the papers, actually read Sanford's book, you'll realize he literally spends basically the whole book citing secular papers. There's not very many creationist citations in there, if at all. I don't remember any off the top of my head. There may be a couple.
The only one that I saw I really objected to was Werner Gitt on the second law of thermodynamics, and
right, yeah.
And I said, John, we agree on 95%, but this is the part of your book I don't agree with. And well, we never got around to, we had bigger fish to fry than that, and I didn't pursue it more. It's, in the scheme of things, it's not that important. And I do like the title is nicer, genetic entropy, than genetic deterioration. It's a catchier title, so I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say, okay, creationists, you don't have to use the word genetic entropy. Say genetic deterioration or reductive evolution.
Mutational meltdown.
Yeah. You're using their terms. And, I am grateful that you respect Dr. Sanford and all the other creationist researchers. But when you're trying to defend your case in a debate, you'll strengthen it by citing evolutionary sources. And again, this is this whole thing. It's like, is it less Christian to cite an evolutionist? It's like, no. Okay. So, Emery and I are kind of on the same page. We spend more of our time looking at secular literature to make the creationist case. We spend more time studying under secular professors to make the creationist case than we do studying creationist literature. Well, I'm speaking for myself. Emery, is that at least close to you, or half and half?
I do spend more time probably in the secular literature than I do in the creationist literature. But to be real, one of my major research interests is polyploidy, and not very many creationists write on that. But I mean, I've read Dr. Jeanson's book on replacing Darwin. I've read that a couple of times because that's another area of interest. But I've also read a ton of the speciation literature in the secular realm too. So like and the natural selection, I've read a ton of papers on natural selection and genetic drift and evolutionary fitness, because for one thing, these guys tend to be a lot more straightforward in their own journals when they're talking to each other. I might even say they're a little bit more honest in some cases. Not every time, obviously. But in some cases, they won't tell the public the same things that they'll tell each other in their peer-reviewed journals. So I spend an awful lot of time in the peer-reviewed literature, and like, I mean, just as a kind of an illustration of how nuts this is, how nuts I am. A particular project I'm working on is closing in on 300 citations. Probably, yes, Sal, yes. And of those 300 citations, probably, I don't know, 250 of them are probably from the peer-reviewed journals. There's probably only like 50 creationist citations in that book. Now there's a couple of footnotes where it's just like explanatory notes. So there's a couple of those in there too. But I'm a glutton for punishment in a sense.
You are.
Spend an awful lot of time in the peer-reviewed literature.
Well, that's, you know, the thing is also to, you know, for those who really are getting deep into this, to avoid accusations of quote mining. That's why you read the whole article, you try to understand it, and then you can articulate the principles yourself. And I know that's hard work, and it's definitely not for everyone. Okay, it's not for everyone, but I'm just saying that, you know, if any of you happen to be engaging with the topic, you don't have to quote creationists, and that's no disrespect to creationists. It's just that you're going to be disadvantaged if you do that just because of the prejudice. And that's why I'm trying to share some things from the secular literature to alert you that you can use their terminology, and they themselves have said it. And you won't be, you know, if you're at least acquainted with the literature, you can say, no, I didn't quote mine it. What did the guy say? Does mutational meltdown exist theoretically, and has it been experimentally observed? Right? It's just,
I mean, it's right there.
I mean, is that an illusion, or is that something that is seriously considered?
Did Lynch not write that paper? I mean, did the paper never exist? Was it put there by space aliens? I mean,
yeah. And by the way,
here?
If I can just self-promote a little bit, I'm the one who brought that passage to Dr. Sanford's attention. And he's like, wow, that's great, Sal. Yeah, Michael Lynch and I have had an interesting journey. You know, it seems we've paralleled each other. So I'm the one who brought that. All this to say, see, you do get the number, you know, there's a reason I'm the #1 YouTube creationist, because I, as voted by people like Dr. Dan, because I do the secular research and I hand it off to other creationists. So, so that one by Michael Lynch is a gem. So, but I have to give credit where credit is due. That was actually passed on to me by someone on Reddit who goes by the handle Eagles107. Now, how did he find this? He's a student of biology, very bright, and biology and biochemistry. Now, why was he in this? He said that his father was dying of cancer. They're going to operate. They prayed. He got healed just before the operation. They opened him up, and it was gone. He said he felt something like honey just flow through his body. And as I said, when Jesus touches people's lives, they're different afterward. He became a committed Christian because of that event. So I just wanted to share that with everybody. Erica Gutzik-Gibbon pointed out, she said, yeah, you know, a lot of the people who are scientists that defend creationism, a lot of them had personal religious experiences. And I'm like, yeah, when Jesus touches your life, you're different.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be an overt miracle. God does something in your heart, you're different. And even she could see that. So now we'll finally get to the last topic now that we covered genetic entropy. I cleared the docket finally. Do you have any remaining thoughts before we move on?
Nope, let's move along.
Alrighty. So this whole thing with Dave Farina, whom we call quote unquote Professor Dave, he responded to James Tour's 15-part series that lasted about 10 hours. So Dave Farina started it with 20 minutes of spewing garbage, and Dr. James Tour spent 15 and a half episodes, maybe 10 hours of video or so, refuting 20 minutes. And he probably spent 40 hours on top of that doing research to refute Dave Farina. And that's what we call Brandolini's law. It's called the BS asymmetry principle. It takes exponentially orders of magnitude more effort to refute BS than it is to state it. And that was on full display in that battle between Dr. Tour and Dave Farina. And sure enough, Dave Farina comes out with a response video, and apparently that got under the skin of some origin of life researchers. And so Dave Farina was able to get some origin of life researchers in his response video. I didn't watch the whole response video because I've heard Dave Farina speak, and I'm just like, dude, you had a BA in chemistry, and apparently it didn't teach you enough because you said two stupid things. You should be in no business criticizing James Tour. First thing he said, the polysaccharide's the same monomer over and over. That's not universally true because there are heteromeric polysaccharides, and James Tour gave a very simple example of it, really easy one that I think is even in the biochem textbook. So that was one stupid thing he said that I knew off the top of the bat. Second, he said any biomolecule is easy to make. I'm just like, that was the most, everyone almost said that's the most stupid thing he said. And I said, just look at lignin, see if you can synthesize that from scratch. Lignin is a carbohydrate that gives wood its properties. So I said, he's just not worth my time. But then some of the viewers have been asking, do you have any response? I said, okay, I owed it to my viewers to pursue this. So I looked at the video. The first 10 minutes was just disgusting ad hominem, unsubstantiated. He was saying, James Tour misquoted me and mischaracterized me. And I'm just like, well, why don't you talk about whether James Tour mischaracterized you talking about polysaccharides? Or why don't you talk about, did James Tour mischaracterize you when he said that you, Dave Farina, said any biomolecule is easy to make, and he just tore you up on that? Is that a mischaracterization? So what really got me there, I said, you're not even backing down. He called you out so badly on this, and you're just saying he mischaracterized you. I'm like, dude, he did not. I heard it with my own ears what you said, Farina, and that was stupid. You got called out on it. Take it like a man. I know that sounds sexist, so maybe take it like a woman, okay? I don't know how to say this anymore in our politically correct culture. I just said, man up to it, man. You screwed up. He called you on it, and you're just glossing it over. I was disgusted at that point. And, if I could be any more disgusted, because I try hard. I mean, I don't like being called out. I really don't. But I have a responsibility to people that follow what I say. If I say something wrong, and these people are going to repeat it, and they're going to pay the price for repeating a mistake that I started, that makes me feel bad. It's like, Farina, don't you have any conscience? I couldn't live with myself pulling the stunts you're doing. So did James Tour not call you out properly? Uh, when he started showing these, even moderately complex carbohydrates, and they need 500 pages of recipe and characterization. That's how difficult it is for a chemist. I said, Farina, this is not honest. You're striving so hard to save face. You're not acknowledging something. So are you fine with Mr. Farina? Are you fine with your viewers repeating your nonsense that any biomolecule is easy to make? Are you fine with that? I couldn't live with myself saying garbage like that. But anyway, so that's my first response to Farina. That part, his ad hominems. So there you have it, guys. If I wanted to, at least that's one part. The second part is he got Lee Cronin in. And Lee Cronin, let me see. Did I lose? Lee Cronin cited this article that he had co-authored, and he's the chief author. So usually the lead author is the guy that does a lot of the work, but then like the laboratory supervisor is listed last. He's like kind of the boss. And so Cronin was listed in the boss position in the co-author list. And so he wrote, in his response, he said, Dr. Tour mischaracterized me, and I don't even remember what he was saying. He said, I wrote a paper that disproves, or something like that. Okay, I know I'm not quoting him correctly, and apologies in advance. But then he cited this paper here to show that there's an advancement in origin of life research. It's spontaneous formation of autocatalytic sets with self-replicating inorganic metal oxide clusters. That sounds impressive. First off, it's inorganic. Life is an organic chemical made of organic chemicals. So what are you achieving by making these inorganic chemicals? I'll tell you what he was achieving. He was achieving kind of changing the subject, redefining the problem, and solving one problem that he can easily solve, and pretending that solves the really difficult problem that he can't solve. This is really dishonest. I'll be charitable. I'll say delusional, because then at least he's believing his own falsehoods. He's not willfully doing something. But I read the paper, and you can read it. I gave the title here. And he talks about, okay, what did he do? They mix these metal oxides. They mix these metal oxides in a beaker, and they got, let's see if they have any pictures of it. He got stuff to kind of just auto-catalyze themselves. He said he got a self-replicator. So let me talk about self-replicators. There's some, if you look at salt crystals, it replicates its crystal structure. Just as the salt crystal grows, it's replicating. It's not inherently hard. There are things that are easy that can self-replicate and things that are hard. So what did he do? These are like metal salts, and they just, they can kind of grow themselves spontaneously. And that's not solving the real problem. The problem with biological materials is that they inherently don't self-replicate. You don't take materials that inherently do self-replicate and then try to use that to illustrate how something that inherently doesn't self-replicate the way biology does, and say that you're making progress. That's not honest. That's you know, that's delusional and it's misleading. And as I read through this paper, I'll tell you what they're doing. They're saying, if I can make a self-replicator, then I've solved the problem of the origin of life, because the origin of life is how we make a self-replicator. You see, they've subtly redefined the problem, and James Tour pointed that out. He had one lecture where he said, they've redefined life as being simply autocatalytic. And it is an autocatalytic reaction, but it's more than that. But what they've done is they've trivialized what life actually is. And trivializing life is done on so many levels, but now it's even done in chemistry. They're saying it's like merely just self-replication. Therefore, if you can get some other chemicals to self-replicate, you can boast that you created life. And so this paper was boasting he basically created life. That's kind of how you might read this. And then that's why Dr. Tour is saying, look at all the hype. A very large proportion of the population believe we've actually created life in the lab. And it's just kind of like, okay, so you can redefine genders and make it something that it's not. They're also redefining life. This is how you solve, this is an agenda here, okay? And so he was just pretending. I'm just like, guy, this isn't being straight up. And Farina was eating it up. I'm like, okay, yeah. But then I'm going to go into a little more details. Emery, if you had some thoughts.
No, Sal, go ahead. I'm probably going to have to drop in about 5 or 10 minutes here. But thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and well, I'm almost done. So,
okay.
Autocatalytic reactions are not necessarily beneficial. They can quickly exhaust resources. A molecule that cuts itself would be an emo teenager, emotional teenager, life destroying. So I'll briefly cover why, yes, life is autocatalytic, but it's very difficult. A lot of it's not something that spontaneously forms, and I'll just cover this briefly. And I covered it a little bit yesterday. The single biopolymer paradox was a term that Steve Benner used in his paper, The Paradoxes of Life. And he said that with the chemicals we use, you have the DNA, the RNA, and the protein. It's very hard for one of them to be an enzyme and simultaneously also an information-bearing molecule, as in one that stores the recipe or blueprints for other molecules or for itself. One can actually see this. With DNA, you have the double helix. And because it has this kind of very nice geometry, it can be easily read. That's a very nice property. Contrast that if we tried to read like a protein, like a helicase, and read the residues on it, read them off, you'd need a specialized machine to be able to read it, to read the helicase, and you'd need another one to read, say, a potassium ion channel, or another one to read a topoisomerase, because they're not kind of this nice molecule like this that is fairly regular, that is readable. And that's what Steve Benner was alluding to, is you have this paradox that you really want. Well, you see this kind of in the mechanical world. You want to have specialized materials and tools to do certain jobs. And likewise, you don't want to have one class of molecules trying to do everything, like the RNA world, so to speak. You want to have a specialized molecule that can be like DNA. It's relatively inert. It's not going to be, in terms of it not having hardly any enzymatic activity, and that's desirable. And you want it to be able to be a very simple geometry like this one has, that you can build a machine to read it. So therefore, your autocatalytic system of life would have molecules like DNA that store the information, and then you would have and it would code for molecules like proteins that can actually do the heavy lifting and actually do the work of machines. So even in the man-made world, when we want to do manufacturing, we have machines that store the blueprints, and then we have a different set of machines that will actually take the blueprints and implement it. And it's the same thing we see in the formation of life. It's not these simple molecules. And Lee Cronin totally redefined what the problem is, because the way it is in life, you have basically, you need to have a transcription and translation system to affect the autocatalysis. Whereas his was so simple, and he's representing that like, oh, I've solved the problem that we're really trying to solve. And that's not true. And so that's kind of my response. And I'm thinking about this. I'm practicing how to articulate this better. And maybe by Wednesday, when I show up with Rob Stadler, we could talk about how there's all this misdirection and whitewashing of actually there's numerous failures. They're trying to represent, what Lee Cronin did was actually representing why origin life is failing. He's having to go to molecules that are not anything like life to try to make his point. So it's all smoke and mirrors at this point. And Emery, if you have any closing thoughts? And
no, I mean, I think you covered I haven't watched the Farina videos. I've been way too busy. But I think, from what I understand, I think you've covered it effectively. I don't think that he's brought anything new to the table that's anything relevant. I think that the origin of life hypothesis is still just about where it was before the Farina videos, which was nowhere.
Nowhere. So I'd like to thank everyone who's come. I'd like to thank Dr. James Carter for watching some of these variety show videos where we just talk about all sorts of random topics. But and I really want a hat tip to Matt for all his support on so many levels. And I'd like to thank him for following what I've been writing since my ARN days in 2003. And that's like 18 years ago. And that really means a lot that I've had someone that has seen me grow up in biology when I had no biology. And I didn't even have a physics degree then. And so thank you, Matt. It means a lot to me that someone has followed my writings over these years. Yes, we do miss the old Telek Thoughts blog. It's gone. And so this coming Wednesday, God willing, Dr. Rob Stadler and I will do the debate that never was. And we're going to invite Dr. Carter if he has time, and Dr. Tan, and maybe even Dr. Ryan Hayes. And after Rob and I maybe give our talk, we can do a nice Dave Farina bashing, a Dave Farina bash. Boy, if everyone shows up, that'll be Dr. Tan, Dr. Stadler, Dr. Carter, Dr. Hayes. That'll be 4 PhDs going after Dave Farina. As if. So,
how many PhDs does it take to nail Dave Farina to the wall? Answer 0, but 4 or 5 would be nice.
So, and thank you, and Nicholas, thank you for taking us through this week. He was my co-host during the week, and those are the week nights when I don't want to be imposing on Emery because he's a graduate student and he's trying to get his homework assignments done. And thank you all for the kind words. We may have a show tomorrow. I don't know. It does make me feel, it makes the day go by nicely that after a day of work, I have something to look forward to hang out and just be with my fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. And one thing, please, in the comment section, if there are things you want to have talked about on the variety show, please post it, and we'll see if we can make something relevant. Now, I did say I was going to try to figure a way to incorporate General Electric Corporation into the talk. I don't have anything to say except they made some really great airplane engines. So that's all I have to say when I said GE. I put GE twice in the title. So God bless you all, and may the intelligent designer, the creator of all life, who came down and died for our sins on the cross, may he bless you richly. And until we meet again, take care and God bless you. Have a good night.